Jenny, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, excited to be here.
I've been looking forward to this conversation because I spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about the future of software engineering, how much that role is changing, the role of product management, how much that role is changing. I've been spent a lot of time on how design is changing. Clearly, it is also changing in a really big way. And you have such a front row seat to where things are heading. I also know you have a lot of very strong opinions about where things are heading. So there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. I want to just start with this broad question. How is the design process changing with the rise of AI?
It's changing a lot. I think it's still also got a long way to go in terms of the way it's changing. Like I think we've actually seen, engineering change a lot more in the past little while than design actually has. But I think the result of engineering changing a bunch is that design is sort of forced to change. And so I think some context around this is I did a talk at a conference in Berlin a few months ago in September, and I called it like "Don't Trust the Design Process," where I basically just said like, hey, this design process that designers have been taught where you go off and you do a bunch of research and discovery, and then you like diverge, you converge, diverge, and it's like this process that we sort of treated as gospel and tried so hard to preserve, and we were like, trust the process. That's basically dead. I think it was sort of dying before the age of AI, but given now that, engineers can go off and spin off their like 7 clods, I think as designers, we really have to let go of that process. And I think that's the big thing that's changing. But I think even in the past 3 to 4 months since I did that talk actually starts to feel it kind of feels outdated to me, which is a little embarrassing. But especially with the big shift of like Opus 4.6 and a bunch of folks just like really discovering and using Claude Code over the holiday break, I think we're seeing this like force to change our process happen even more. The way I sort of see it now is like there are basically 2 types of design work, and design work is kind of like becoming really stratified in this new world. So there's like the first one, which is really just like supporting the implementation and execution. So this is the one where, engineers are using their 7 clods to create all these features, and anybody can like put an idea out there, and you can just like talk about an idea, and somebody, usually actually an engineer, because they're still better at implementing this stuff than we are, they will just make a scrappy version of it and you can try it out. And you as a designer actually like do not have the time to make these beautiful mocks anymore, or to like kind of lead in this way. And then I think there's like the second kind of work that feels also really important, which is like creating the sort of vision or direction for things. This one feels like the hardest to make time for, and it's one that like we still did before, but I think the shape of it's very much changing, because I think we used to go off and say, we're going to do this design vision. We're going to go off and make this like 2-year, 5-year, whatever, 10-year vision even, and we're going to like point us towards something. But the way that the technology is changing now, like we actually don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. There's too much changing. And it usually becomes a vision that's like 3 to 6 months out, and isn't necessarily something that is like creating this like beautiful deck that's like beautifully story told. It's sometimes just like creating a prototype that points people in the right direction. And I think this kind of work is like still really important in this world, because in a world where people can spin off their 7 clods, make whatever features they want in any kind of like direction or in implementation, you need to point them towards something. And in order to make sure that we're all making something that makes sense together and is also done in a way where it's like efficient, right? Like if we're all working towards something that has one greater cause, it's like much more efficient to do that than just random things. So that's like the big shift that I'm seeing. And I think I have opinions about it now, but ask me in like 3 months and it might actually change even more.
So what you're saying here is it's not like you or the design field is like, we need to change. It's engineering, and the fact that you can build so quickly just forces the role of a designer to change, because as you said, engineers can just ship. And what you're finding here is like, you're better off not blocking that, letting them cook, as they say. And then there's kind of this mode of helping them along as they ship, bring it together, make sure it all kind of connects, guide them a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't think there is like one unifying voice that's like designers, we need to change right now. But there is sort of like the follow-on effects of engineering tooling really changing. I think we'll probably see design tooling change in this next year or so as well. But a lot of it right now is trailing that. And I think it's also really empowering for us too, because as designers, we also now have access to a lot of these coding tools and we can be a part of the process in a way where we're implementing stuff like it's like I'm doing a lot of last mile stuff where I'm implementing all the polish and like and sort of like working with engineers really closely to get the feature across the line, and also prototype stuff in actual code as opposed to like relying on engineers to do that again.
How true do you think this is at all companies, at say AI companies, non AI companies? Someone may be hearing this. Okay, Anthropic, Claude, like okay, it's like they're at the bleeding edge for one. Two, it's like developer-y a little bit. But I think people might be feeling like, okay, this is not going to happen at Salesforce. This is not going to happen at, I don't know, ServiceNow, wherever. So I guess, do you feel like this is where all teams are heading? Is it mostly AI, bleeding edge companies? How widespread do you think the design process shift is going to be?
So the talk that I did last year has weirdly been like the most resonant talk that I've done. And I think it's something that people are starting to feel across the industry where they're like, "Oh yeah, we can't do the old design process anymore." We are using tools like Claude Code and B0 and whatnot to start to spin up prototypes, and PMs are starting to spin up prototypes and stuff like that as well. So I think there's something there emerging. But the other interesting observation with that talk too was there was actually also a decent amount of like backlash. Like people clearly have invested their entire careers in learning, teaching, using this like really stable design process. And I think there was a lot of like discrediting, like, oh yeah, like we can't do without discovery. We can't do without these pieces of process. So I think there is still a piece of the industry that is not quite there yet in terms of this way of working, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a big part of this is like, you could argue, like, the question is what leads to the best, most successful products and companies? And you could argue it's spending time doing discovery, user research, mocks, iterating, beta testing, or it could be just engineer ship stuff that's okay, not amazing, good enough. We learn, iterate, build, iterate. Is your sense that that second path is not only is that just like what everyone's doing, but that actually leads to the better product at this point?
I think you sort of have to choose and use your discretion as to like when to actually ship something. But I think the ability to execute, try something out and try it with like real data, and a real user's like kind of mindset in the product, I think that does lead to a better product, especially as we're all working with these like new developing AI models that are non-deterministic. You can't mock up all the states, and you can't theorize and you can't even make like a clickable prototype with it. You sort of have to use the actual models underneath, and you have to sort of see people try it out with their use cases, because with these models, like you can design them for different use cases, but you actually discover use cases as you see people using them. So yes.
The other thing I always hear, and building on what you just said, is just you don't know what people will do with AI. You don't know how good it'll be at certain things, the non-deterministic piece of it. So you can create these amazing mocks of what it might be, and then people use it in a completely different way, which is where Cowork came from, and probably even Claude Code at the beginning. And so what's it just like to be a designer at Anthropic? Just like give us a day in the life of working at Anthropic at the center of the storm.
A good amount of time at Anthropic is actually just like catching up on what's happening at the company. I think this is the company where I've worked at a few other companies around this size where I think there's just a lot of like information and a lot of things going on, but I feel really compelled to keep up with it. Like there's stuff that is like model developments on the research side. And then at any given time, there are just so many different teams prototyping and trying different ideas out. And there's a bunch of different like code names and stuff like that. And a lot of time I'm just like trying to navigate and figure out what those projects are, because I think I'm just trying to spot and see like, hey, what's coming up ahead for me? Because there's stuff from both the research team, but also some of our like labs teams that are closer to research and trying out and prototyping stuff. And then there's just like stuff I want to try out. Like we have a bunch of prototypes and products internally that we can use. And I am just curious and I want to try those things out. And then I think there's also a lot of folks who internally have a lot of insights and opinions on where the industry is going. And some of those are just like really interesting to read because a lot of these are like philosophical debates or directions of the company and stuff like that. And yeah, I feel like I just want to keep up with these things. Whereas I think in a normal company, I'm like, it's fine. This is stuff that's happening outside of my reach. I don't really care as much. Where here, I think that it's both the volume and the kinds of things that are happening that I'm like really interested in keeping up with. And then aside from that sort of keep up, that's not a huge part of my job, but I do think it's a really interesting part of it.
Well, it connects to the point you made earlier. A big part of the design role now is helping engineers and teams execute, not just telling them, here's the mock, here's the design. It's helping them stay on track, helping them connect ideas, create a cohesive experience as it's happening. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think part of it is just curiosity. Like it
Mhm.
feels like I have this front row seat to so much
Yeah.
that's happening in the industry. And so a lot of it is like, yeah, our Slack is a gold mine. Like I'm just excited to read through the things that people are working on and they're saying.
I never thought about how there's already so much AI news to keep track of as a regular person, and then actually seeing what's actually happening inside a lab is a whole new set of
Yeah.
feeds to watch.
Yeah. It's like I
Oh
don't.
my
I
God.
think that is the best AI news is probably internally if you're ever at one of these companies in the Slack.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just problem keeps getting harder. Just keeping track of what's going on. Okay. So that's part of the job. What else?
There is still some of like the traditional like let me think about what's happening in the future and let me like make some designs for that. That's something that, for example, this week I've allotted some time to where I'm like, okay, cool. Like we have been in a lot of like execution mode for co-work, and now I want to set aside some time to think about, hey, what does the next like 3 months look like, and where where could that actually go given where the market's at, where the models are at, and what could that be? Because I think it still really helps to visualize that and show that to the team and point everyone in the same direction. And then I also spend a bunch of my day just jamming on stuff with engineers. Like a lot of it is just a conversation or like whiteboarding or going through something that they built and giving them feedback on it and being a designer in that kind of way where we're like consulting. And then I spend a part of my day in code, like polishing, implementing stuff. Sometimes what happens is an engineer and I have worked through something and they've implemented a first version of it, and I just go in and polish it with them. And that's a really fun part of my job that I think didn't exist as much a few months ago.
Are you still doing elements of the traditional design process? Prototyping, user research, panels, I don't know, just like going out and in, like the whole thing you described.
Yeah, I think we're still doing all of that to some extent. Like we have a user researcher on the team who is putting together both like traditional studies as well as surveys, and the whole team is reading those studies and that feedback. We are still prototyping stuff. I'm still mocking stuff up. I think it's just I have a wider set of tools now, and I think the proportion of time I spend doing each thing just has changed.
Got it. Okay. So that's a
Yeah.
really interesting takeaway. It used to be that was a huge, I guess, what would be the pie chart of what your life was before, where it's like traditional thinking, planning, prototyping, mocking, research, and then just like feedback and execution, and now today.
Yeah, I think as a designer a few years ago, I would say like maybe 60 to 70% of it was like mocking and prototyping stuff up. And then spending, the last 20 or so, some of the last 20 or so, like doing the sort of like jamming with engineers, consulting with them, and the last like 10% maybe doing, coordination meetings, etc. But now I feel like the mocking up part of it is like 30 to 40%. And then there's that other 30 to 40% there that is now jamming and pairing directly with engineers. And then there's like a slice. I don't know how much I have left, but like there's a slice of it that is now like implementation as well. Yeah.
Like actually building and shipping.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So kind of following that thread, what's in your AI stack? What do you, as a designer, I know you're a manager, and I want to talk about how you actually are IC also. What's in your AI stack? What tools are you using in your role?
What is in my AI stack? Well, we work at Anthropic, so we're going deep on the Claude stack.
Yeah.
I'm using obviously like chats, Claude Chat, but increasingly more and more Claude Cowork. I've basically shifted all of my chat use cases over to Cowork because I've been finding that, it sort of is better at these longer running tasks. And most of the things I was asking Claude for are these longer running tasks. And then there's Claude Code, of course. I use it mostly with VS Code in the IDE because I'm usually tweaking front end stuff, and it helps to just like be able to see the code and then talk to Claude as well. I've been trying to actually use Claude Code more remotely, like through both mobile and through Slack as well. It's really fun for somebody to say like, oh yeah, this one icon's off or something, and you just mention Claude, and Claude does it, and then you pick up the PR and it's done. That's been really, really fun too. And yeah, I think that's just like, I think we're a fully Claude house here. So yes, that's basically my stack.
Are you still using Figma as a designer?
I am still using Figma.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was waiting to hear. Okay.
Yes.
So Figma is still part of your life. Being a former Figmate, is that what we all were called?
Yeah. Figmates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I know there's this big debate on Twitter, just like, is code the future of design? Do we need Figma anymore? Do we need a design? What's your sense? Figma still important?
I mean, as a former Figmate, I maybe I'm biased in that way, but I think there is still, like, when I use Figma, I'm like, yes, this is what I should be using, and it still fills a very good gap for me. I think a lot of that is actually just like, one is exploring a lot of different options. I think that's a really important part of the design process, to be able to just think about like 8 to 10 different ways to do something. I think the best design happens when you're able to just like throw a bunch of ideas at the wall and curate and just like and push yourself to come up with a bunch of these different directions. Right now, coding or right now working with some of these coding tools doesn't lend itself super well to that, because it's super linear. You get super invested in one direction and you just iterate with Claude on them, for example. So Figma has been really great at just like exploring all these different options, and I think it's still going to exist that way to some extent. And then I think there's like really fine sort of visual and interaction details that are also really great to be able to just try out in Figma. Again, it's a lot of different directions, but it's micro directions. It's being able to think about like different typography or styles, having those in a canvas where you can just explore that specifically is still so helpful, and is not something that I always want to like go directly to code in.
It's interesting you still use an IDE, because in engineering, it's clearly shifting to command lines, agents. IDEs are kind of moving to not be cool anymore. So and it makes a lot of sense. You just want to edit some CSS things, some like color stuff. And so I could see why not just telling the agent, hey, just come on, change this one hex value. Just changing it is so much easier.
Yeah, it's really annoying to be like, can you change this to this class, when you can just go in and change it to a different class.
So that's interesting. I wonder if IDEs now become useful for designers and PMs, and engineers have moved on.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of your time you spend working with engineers, giving them feedback, kind of nudging them in the right direction. There's a sense, I feel, of just like your advice is like, let go. Don't feel like you need to be this gatekeeper. But there's this piece of, okay, help them move in a direction that is cohesive and is creating products we're proud of. A lot of designers, I think, are in this boat right now, just like, oh my God, I can't keep up with all these engineers shipping stuff all day. What's something you learned about just either how to help your engineers get better at design so that it just ends up being better, or just kind of keeping on top of this and not going crazy?
Whenever I do work with engineers on projects, and it's more on like a consulting basis, I do just try to explain, why I'm thinking a way that I'm thinking, to help them like extract principles, as opposed to me just being like, no, I don't think this should go here. It's like, no, I think we should have a button here because not everybody realizes you can prompt this. And here's an example where it comes from research and whatnot. So I also just like try to point engineers to our design system and stuff like that in code, because right now Claude is like writing a lot of the code, and it's not always like picking up stuff in the design system and whatnot. So as much as I can sort of equip them with stuff that they can use in the future without me, that's helpful. And then on your point of trying not to go crazy, I think it's hard. I think it's really hard right now. And I see this a lot from actually like both engineers and designers, where it's like, now that we're sort of capable of doing so much, we want to do more. And so I think it's not just designers who are feeling like, oh yeah, we have to keep up with engineers. I think even engineers are like, how do we keep up with ourselves right now? So That's something I'm hearing a lot.
So true.
Yeah.
Oh man, how to keep up with all our agents, our 7 agents we're constantly running.
Yeah.
Okay, so then as a designer, where in this profession, craft and great experience and quality and trust are such a core part of the job to help instill that in the products, because that in theory leads to really successful products and companies. How do you just think about maintaining craft, quality, trust as your products are just shipping 1,000 times a day and you're not able to stay on top of them and there's no designer involved?
It's not that there's no designer involved. It's more just like it's almost like there's too much for one designer to handle. But I think with this, I think about where the features or products are, that like where they are sort of in the cycle of adoption versus like kind of early preview. So for example, like we sometimes will launch things and we will say, hey, this is a research preview. It's early, it's gonna have a bunch of these flaws, and we caveat that a bunch. And I think Claude Cowork is actually a good example of this, where we labeled it a research preview and we put it out there knowing that, hey, this is like similar to our models, this is the worst it's ever gonna be, but we're gonna put it out there because we believe, internally we've tried it a bunch and there's something really powerful here that some people will benefit from. It might not yet be the easiest to work with. It might not be the highest quality. It might have some issues with it, but we're going to put it out there because we believe the benefits outweigh the cons. I think that is like okay to do, especially when there is something really valuable with the product already and it's worth putting it out there. But I think the promise you sort of have to make your users is like, hey, we're gonna put it out there, but we're gonna iterate. We're gonna take your feedback and we're gonna iterate and we're gonna make it better. And you have to sort of commit that. You have to show that to the world. You have to respond to people's feedback, and you have to show that you are continuously shipping and improving it. Because I think the way that you really lose trust around quality and releasing something early is if you release it early and then nothing ever happens. That is something that degrades a brand. But whenever you put something out early, like it's possible to do that and like maintain the brand of your company. And I think that's something that we've been doing pretty well. And I think if there's anything anyone's listening can take away from it, is like, yeah, we're continuing to do that. And I think that is actually really fun for me as a designer, because you put something out there and you actually learn and you get feedback about it immediately and you know what to do next.
The way I've heard you describe this is building trust through speed.
Yeah, for sure. It's building trust through speed, but also just like making people feel like they've been heard and that we're fixing things based on what they're trying to use it for, and their feedback is actually appreciated and used.
Yeah, it's clear when the labs launch stuff, and y'all are very good at this, everyone on the team is tweeting and just like responding to tweets and comments and then shipping, hey, we fixed this yesterday and this is happening. So there's a clear sense of this is just today and we know this is broken and we will fix it. And then because Cloud Code can code very quickly, the fixes come very fast. Okay, so another big question that people are asking, that I ask a lot on this podcast, is around just like what skills become valuable. And like another way I've been thinking about it, Lex put it this way recently, is where will human brains continue to be valuable as AI gets smarter? So we've gone through this progression of tab completing segments of code to 100% of code is written by AI now. Like, it's crazy. To now AI is reviewing its own code. Boris on the podcast recently was saying Claude Code is now helping him come up with ideas and decide what to build, which is like, okay, wow, look at that. Look at it go. The whole product workflows, the product development process slowly get eaten up by AI. So the question is just like, where will human brains still be useful, at least until we have super intelligence? Do you think AI is going to get very, very good at taste, judgment, design?
I think it will get better at taste and judgment and design. Yeah, like I think we might be holding on to that a little bit too much and saying like, oh yeah, like, a designer or somebody will always know the best thing to ship or the best version of this. But I do think AI's sense of taste will get better. At the end of the day, someone has to decide like what is actually going to get built and what actually matters. And when I think about people saying like, oh, like AI is just going to build this software for us, a lot of the hard parts of building software are actually like not building it, you know? If you think about the hardest times that you've had at work, Lenny, it's probably things like, oh, you and some other person like disagreeing about like what should go into this feature or what shouldn't go into this feature. And those things still feel like, yes, AI can weigh in, but it can't necessarily solve this dispute between you and somebody else. And so there is something about like deciding what actually goes into the things we build, which I guess is taste in some way, but maybe not taste in like the way we think about like aesthetic taste or whatnot. There's some sort of like, it's like judgment around what to do next.
Just watching how quickly AI had took over coding, which I think a year ago, definitely 2 years ago, most people are like, I don't think so. I don't think AI will get this good, and that the best engineers in the world trust it so much. They're not even looking at the code anymore. Like that's where we got. It just made me reevaluate all these assumptions I've had about, okay, AI will never be as good as really good PMs, designers at judging what is great and deciding what to build. But I'm just like starting to think, I think it will get there. Like even an example you shared, like it could give these two people trying to make a decision. Here's all of the data you need to make a decision. And here's why this is the right answer. And just press yes, press one, and I'll go ahead and build it.
Yeah.
So I think we're just, to your point, I think we undervalue just how good it'll get at this stuff. Okay, so your sense is it'll get better, but your sense is we'll still need awesome designers to be involved, awesome PMs to help make these decisions, engineers, of course.
Yeah. I think someone will still have to decide like, oh, we want to build this kind of product. Or like, given what the AI is presenting us, like someone still needs to be accountable for the decision. You know, the same way that like, even though Claude can write all this code for you today, it is still an engineer who's accountable for like, does that code actually work? Does this actually make sense in the product? So I think there's that like decision-making / judgment layer, which feels like maybe one day we won't have to do that, but it still falls on us. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. It makes me think about the radiology example where there's always the sense that AI is going to take over that field of radiology and tell you what is going on. Mm-hmm. But like the human is mostly useful for signing off on the decision because someone needs to be liable if they're wrong, which isn't the best job in the world. But that's a different game, is health versus code.
Yeah.
Okay. Another ongoing question in AI and design is just like, it feels like chatbots and terminals are just like I don't think anyone expected this to be the lasting user interface to AI. Like chatbots, okay, no, this is just like a temporary stop along the journey. But now it's like gone even further in just terminals. Do you have thoughts on just, I don't know, do you think there will be a next step of how we interface with AI, or do you think chatbots and terminals are mostly where we end up?
There will likely be a combination of both, like both UIs and interfaces that you are interacting with, clicking with, and that feel like more tactile. We are already seeing this and playing with this within Claude, like the chat bot. So we recently released a bunch of these widgets that let Claude sort of elicit and ask you questions and also show you, things like the weather and stocks and whatnot in interactive ways. And I think those have had a really good reception because people still like to see UIs and touch them and click them, and they are much more efficient than, typing something to Claude. But at the same time, when we really leaned into this like chatbot paradigm, like I think that it just gave us this whole world of flexibility that we didn't get with these sort of like baked in UIs. So my read here is like, I don't think chat is ever going away because this opened up this like new way of like infinite ways to work with the model and to sort of like talk to the computer that we just didn't have before. But I think that it will still be most direct for very specific things to exist in this UI. And I think that what will probably happen here is that a lot of those UIs will be generated more and more often by the models as opposed to something that we're like hand coding each instance. But I think we're in this space where I don't think chat and maybe even like talking to the terminal is going to go away.
It's interesting that like with OpenClaw, Claude, Modplot, all the names, the innovation, one of the big innovations is like another way to chat with it through WhatsApp and Telegram and SMS, just like another form of chatbot. But that was a big unlock. Oh, I could just chat with it through WhatsApp.
Yeah. And it's like chatting and talking to someone is still Like, we as humans are doing it. And it's a way for us to interact in a really rich way. And now we just have this other medium to like interact with a computer, basically.
Yeah. So Kevin Wheel, who works at another AI lab, I won't mention, he had this great point on the podcast that talking is such a beautiful way to handle every level of intelligence. We can talk to people that are very, very smart and not so smart, and it's talking. And it scales so well across the spectrum. We can talk to people at 200 IQ, 300 IQ. It's talking still works. So that's why it's been this beautiful way to deal with the growing intelligence of models as it continues to work.
Yeah.
You can test queries, validate the reasoning, and lock down permissions before anything hits production. If you want AI analytics in your product without building the whole stack from scratch, check out omni.co/Lenny for a free Okay, I'm going to come back to this whole idea of management in IC. So you've kind of put yourself back into the IC role in a lot of ways. Talk about that, and if you think that's just like a thing design managers need to be doing.
Yeah, I have takes on this. So this past year at Anthropic, I joined as an IC at first, and then I managed a team for a few months in like an org structure that sort of needed it, and now I'm actually back to doing full-time IC work. And I joined Anthropic as an IC because I was just really excited about the kind of work that there was to be done as an IC here, but also because I was feeling like, I sort of want to be close to the work. And I think this feels like a really important time to do it before I like ascend the corporate ranks, and I was having these like questions and doubts about like, is middle management like, is that safe in the future? Like, is the way that we're working actually, is this going to be a job that persists into the future, or should I, try something else and like get my hands dirty kind of thing? And to be totally fair, like I actually love both sides of the coin. Like I love managing people. I love like setting up teams, and being at that level. But I also just really loved IC work. Like I was sort of like a reluctant manager when I did it, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll do it. So I love both sides of the coin like pretty equally. But I think actually what being an IC across this past year has taught me is that it actually just like gave me a lot of skills that I don't think I would have gained if I was just managing throughout this year. Like the design, like I mentioned, the design process has changed so much in this past year, and I feel like I've just picked up so many hard skills that I wouldn't have necessarily had the time to do if I was just managing a team. So that's actually the best thing it's afforded me, and I think at any point if I'm like managing a team again, I think it will give me the empathy and understanding of how the design process has changed. And I think that's actually a really important thing right now because, yeah, the teams are working so differently. And I think it's actually pretty hard to empathize if you are not working in that way, or you're like not always like testing all the tools and trying stuff. But yeah, like it's an interesting time to be a designer. And if I had not worked in this environment, I don't know if I would have totally understood it or like knew what to do or how to guide my teams. So that's sort of what this year really gave me.
And so you were previously a director of design at Figma, right? How
Yep.
big was your team? Like how large was your org, just to give people a reference?
At the max, I probably had, I think 12, 15 designers or so, and I had a few managers as well. So
Cool. And then
it
you went
was like
back
an
to
org.
IC.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you had the sense that middle management might not last. What's your current feeling? Do you think design management is a thing that persists long term, or do you think everyone turns into IC?
I think as long as there is a team of people, it helps to have somebody who is managing a team. Like I think there's like real value in managers. It depends kind of like what the shape of the manager is and what they actually do. But the way I think about like what a helpful manager is these days is somebody who is not just like, I think pure people management, like like just somebody to sort of set you up, help you in your career, have one-on-ones, make sure you're feeling like good at work. I think that is kind of not a thing as much anymore. But I think somebody who can really function as like giving the team direction as well as doing some of the people management stuff, like that tied together, I think is the future of what managing looks like, at least for now. Like somebody who can really engage with the team in terms of like the work and giving direction there, as well as like creating the environment for them to do their best work.
And do you see yourself going back into management long term?
I probably will. Like I think I really just love, helping a team like build the best product possible. And my motto there is like whatever it takes, if it's somebody that's if the team needs somebody to give the team direction and like set up the team and whatnot, that could be me. If the team just like needs somebody to execute on it, that could be me as well.
So the advice I'm hearing for people in design that are especially managers is you almost need to move back into IC in order to truly understand what is happening and how much it's changing so that you can be a better manager.
I think so. And I think traditionally, at least what I've seen, a lot of like the engineering disciplines, like when they hire EMs or even sometimes like directors there, they actually make the EMs like take a rotation for a few months and pick up a few tasks and really understand how the technology works before they become a full-time manager. And I think design probably needs to do something similar too, where I think in the past design has been much more like people management oriented.
What did you find yourself most rusty in when you went back to IC designer?
Actually like doing crits, and just
Getting criticized.
Yeah, getting criticized. You're like, oh yeah, like it is hard to get critical feedback and to hear it on such a regular basis, because that's the thing you have to do as a designer is like it's a pretty vulnerable exercise to share work and present it with your team, and then also just get a lot of critical feedback and take that all the time. Yeah.
So currently you're leading design / IC designing on Cowork. Is that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So Boris, he was on the pod recently, talked about how there's like a lot of debate about what Cowork should be. And there's all these big ideas. And he's like, in the end, let's just make it like a terminal basically in the product and just kind of a fancy terminal. Is there anything you could share about just the process of landing on where you landed for that experience of Cowork? I have it here on my monitor, by the way, looking at it.
With Cowork specifically, we have had a bunch of different prototypes internally of what that could look like. And it's one of those things where we tried a lot of things and then I think we weren't really sure like when it was actually going to be ready to ship. And then it's sort of like everything all at once. Like we were like, okay, we're gonna ship it soon.
It was 10 days, 10 days of building.
Yeah, it was definitely longer than that. Like overall, it was like 10 days to get it from what we had internally to something that we were ready to ship externally. So we'd been building it for a while, but we weren't really sure about like the actual form it was going to take. And so the way it got there is actually there was a lot of different other explorations that we had internally on top of different agent harnesses and whatnot. And we just had prototyped little parts of the different interactions that ended up in Cowork. So things like when Claude gives you a to-do list, we tried a bunch of different form factors for that. We tried a bunch of different form factors for the way it presents you different like multiple choice questions. We tried a bunch of different ways to teach people what the use cases are and whatnot. And I don't know if we like landed on the best form factor ever, but essentially it was like stuff that was sort of already working internally that people liked that we just thought we were going to get some more signal on by releasing it. So I think forcing ourselves to release it within that 10 days that we did, it was just sort of like whatever we had, let's put it out there and then let's go out there and iterate from there, which is what we're doing.
And it blew up the internet when you launched it, so it worked out.
Yeah.
Is there a feature of Cowork today that you're either most proud of or just like can't wait to fix and improve?
Honestly, I think I'm just most proud of us actually just like shipping it, to be honest, and putting it out there. And I don't know if there's like one specific thing yet, because like I think when you work on something and you work on it so long, especially as a designer, you're like, I don't know if all I can do is see flaws in it. But I think there's a lot of stuff that I'm excited about. Like we have been iterating, especially on the homepage, and to make that something where it feels more like, hey, these are like tasks you can give Claude and the tasks that Claude are working on. And so that actually should be rolling out. It might already be rolled out by the time this
I see
comes
like
out.
this little randomizer thing where you click it and it
hmm
gives you all these different ideas.
Yeah. And then so when you actually start to work with Claude on stuff, it feels more like a to-do list. Like it feels more like these are things Claude's working on. These are things that Claude needs your attention on. And I think there's an opportunity here to make it feel much more like this like shared to-do list between you and Claude. So excited to iterate on that. And then I'm also excited to think more about like what is the actual true form factor of this? Like is it stuck in the screen always? Or how does this sort of like reach out to the different surfaces that it's working with?
I love that you shared that it wasn't just 10 days to do this thing. There's like these numbers that people throw out there. We build it in 10 days. And your point is like there was time spent thinking about what direction it should go and prototyping, mocking, trying stuff. And then it's like, okay, now we know what we want it to be. Let's build it and ship it.
Yeah, I think for some reason that became like the viral thing that got taken away from all of the sort of co-work announcements is that it only took 10 days. But I think there have just been so many different explorations and people that have worked on different pieces of co-work that yeah, it was not just 10 days, and there's a lot of different people involved. It's one of those things where it's like the idea kept coming back, and it's like never the right moment, or there's like different variations of it, and then all of a sudden it's the right moment, and it feels like, oh, so obvious all along, but there was a long, long journey to get there.
And by the way, for people that don't know much about cowork, is like the way I think about it, it's like Claude with hands where you can do stuff on your
Yeah.
computer. How would you describe it, just like in a sentence or two?
That's a good description. I actually haven't heard that, but I like that. I might use it more often as Claude with hands. I also think about it as like it's like Claude, but Claude is really good at taking all your garbage and then turning it into something nice. Like I think one of my favorite, like any sort of use case that I really like out of cowork is just like giving it a folder of my stuff, and it doesn't really matter what's in that folder, but I'm able to extract something good out of it.
I've done that many times. Okay. Coming back to managing and being a manager and the role of a designer, I want to talk about hiring for a little bit. So seeing how much is changing in the role of a designer, what do you look for that's maybe new? Like, what do you now look for when you're hiring designers that you think is really important for them to be successful in this new world?
Well, I do think working specifically in the kind of environment that I do, there's just like a sense of like resilience and like roll with it kind of thing that I think is really important because yeah, so much is changing around us, and you have to be really willing to adapt, to try out new methods, to try out new tools and learn stuff, as opposed to just like be stuck in the old processes and the old ways. But then I think about also there's probably 3 archetypes of folks that are really interesting to me right now. And I think these folks were already interesting to me before, but I feel like is in this era feels especially important. So the first one I would call is like strong generalists. So not just like regular generalists where they're like kind of good at a lot of things, but like people that are like almost like block shaped, in that T-shaped framework where it's like they're really good at like a few core skills, like 80th percentile good. I think this is like pretty rare and hard to hire for, to be honest. But I like this because the design role we've already seen is kind of like stretching and spanning, right? Like we're all becoming more PM shaped, all becoming engineering shaped. And so if you already have strong skills in a few different buckets, it's really easy for you to sort of like flex around and expand your role. So that's really exciting to me. It's just somebody who is really good at a bunch of things. Again, a huge ask. And then the other person that's really exciting to me is in that T-shaped framework, like a deep specialist, like someone is T-shaped, but like the tip of the T probably is like goes down farther than most other people. So folks that are maybe like the top, like 10% in the industry and whatnot. Again, super hard to find. And I feel very lucky that like, working at some of these places, like folks like these, you can sort of afford to hire them and actually bring them on board. And then my last one is probably the one that I think we're all overlooking, which is what I call the craft new grad. It's just somebody who's like early career and feels kind of like wise and experienced beyond their years, but is also just like very humble and and very eager to learn. I think this person is really interesting right now because I think most companies are just hiring like senior talent, like folks that have done things before, are super experienced. But given how much the roles are changing and what we're expected to do is changing, I think having somebody who almost has like a blank slate and is just like a really quick learner and is really eager to learn new tactics and stuff like that and doesn't have like all these baked in processes and rituals in their mind, that's super valuable. So I think those are the folks that I think a lot of us are just like overlooking, but I'm like really excited about.
This is awesome. On the deep T shape, what's an example of someone in design that has what's a skill that they're really good at?
Sometimes there's designers who are just like really technical in a way where they could be like 50% of software. They're basically a software engineer. Like that's really interesting, especially because right now, like a lot of it is, well, at least for us, it's like, you're working directly with the model. So it helps when you have just like deep engineering expertise. But another like deep kind of like specialist T is just, maybe they're just really good at like visual design or just like designing icons or something where things like that, given that anybody can make anything, having that deep specialist slant feels like, oh yeah, they can really help differentiate the things that we're building.
Awesome. Okay. And then this block shape, I had Mark Andreessen on the podcast. We kind of called it the F shape or E shape, where there's like multiple T things, sideways F, sideways E, I guess. Is that what you're describing, where there's like many things you're really, really good at?
Yeah. And like basically like, I don't know, if you almost had their skill set, it would look like a block, like
Because
instead of
there's so many skills that like the T
Yeah.
is spread out. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, and the correct new grad. So this is just like someone that is eager, like open-minded, gritty, very smart, I imagine is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If someone's like a young designer, trying to break in, trying to be successful, what would your advice be to them to help them have a shot at joining Anthropic, for example?
I would just say just like build a bunch of stuff, like try a bunch of stuff out, build actual things. I think that can feel, I don't really know what the state of like design education or education is these days, but at least from like back when I was in school, like everything was very like theoretical and like, here, we're going to teach you some approaches and whatnot. But like the best kind of like cracked new grad folks I know are just like people who just like use the technology, build actual things, don't feel like limited by, how little experience they might have. I think that sometimes they're actually unburdened by that because like we have expectations of ourselves after being in the industry for so long, but they actually don't. And they sort of feel like anything is possible. And so just like building a bunch of stuff and sharing it with people and finding a community of folks that also do that. I think my one call here too is like, I went to a school that started something called Socratica, like but a few years after, actually a while after I graduated. And basically their whole thing is like building stuff and showcasing it almost like a science project. And I think there's just been a really cool movement there of folks who just like build things and do things. Like, for example, somebody built this like Claude robot project. This was like a few years ago too, where they were just assembling robots that were running on Claude. And then somebody else did something where she just wanted to put googly eyes on a bus in Boston or something. And there's just like a sense of both like agency in terms of like, yeah, we can just do stuff, but then also this community where people were just trying and building things and sharing things with each other. So whatever that looks like, given the, the school that someone's from or graduating from, yeah, doing that kind of stuff is the stuff that will make people stand out.
For current designers that are in a mid-career, awesomely senior, do you think you need to get technical and learn to code, at least build, or do you think you could be really successful and just not lean into that and get better at other stuff?
I think it definitely helps to maybe not like learn how to code so much that you're building something from scratch, but it does feel like more and more of the designer's vocabulary right now is implementing some stuff. I wonder though, as the models, both the models and the products get better, if like we probably will continue to like move up the abstraction layers, and you won't have to actually know how each single line of code will work. But I think what I would say is like start to bring that into your like toolkit, the coding tools, whether or not it's like you're actually becoming technical. I think any designer should just be really aware and like know how to use the tools that are at hand, as opposed to maybe like learning and like going off and, learning React or et cetera, et cetera.
How good of a designer is Claude, would you say, or Claude Code, whatever you want to describe? Like, would you hire Claude as a designer, or is like not there yet?
I don't think Claude is there yet. I don't think Claude is
Okay.
there yet in terms of a designer you would hire. I think it is not yet the strong generalist or the deep specialist or the cracked new grad. I think it's pretty good at a first pass and at presenting a bunch of different ideas to you, but nothing there quite feels like special and hireable yet.
Which is good news for designers for now, that it sucks at this for now. And I'm so curious to see how good it could get at this. That's like such a big open question is, can it pump out amazing, novel, unique, creative experiences, or is it's just never going to be that good as a human designer?
I mean, it's gotten a lot better in the last year or so, even. So, yeah.
There's a couple management, I don't know, rituals or takes you have that I've heard from folks that you work with that I want to touch on. One is that you have this hot take that low leverage time for managers is just not a thing, that there's a lot of benefit you can get out of things that people consider low leverage. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I remember like first becoming a manager, and I think one of the pieces like of advice that I either got from a course or a book or something is like, now that you're a manager, you have to like really prioritize your time and categorize your work. And there was like this 2x2 of like, I don't remember what it was in it, but you essentially say like, oh, these are the things that only I can do. These are the things anybody else can do. And everything else, like it's low leverage and you shouldn't do that anymore. And a lot of the low leverage things were just like, like things that are really nitpicky in the weeds, or just like literally, yes, probably somebody else could do those tasks. But when I think about like leaders and managers that I have respect the most, I actually think some of their best traits is that they choose like low leverage tasks that they take on themselves. And that actually ends up being actually a very high leverage thing because it's them who's doing it. So one example is whenever you have like senior leaders who just like test the shit out of the product and they're just like so in tune with it. And they dog food it, they repro the bugs, they spend a bunch of time with like engineers, like sharing the logs and like nitpicking and stuff like that. And I think that ends up being like super actually high leverage, even though it's a lot of time of like nitty gritty time, because it creates this like familiarity with the product, which I think is really good. It also creates this vibe where it's like, oh yeah, this senior leader really cares deeply and they actually know the ins and outs of the product and they're rolling up their sleeves and they're giving this feedback and working with the team on it. And I think similarly to what I've seen is like when a senior leader is able to like fix a bug now, even like I think I've actually seen like Mike Krieger before, like put in PRs himself. And it's really nice because it's like, okay, cool. Like we're all on this team together and nothing is like below this person. And I think another thing that I love that's like a little bit more cultural is when somebody like goes out of the way to like make somebody's like anniversary card or something, and like vibe code them something super nice, or make them a super nice card. Because I think it just shows that, it's like an EA or somebody can put together the card, but this leader is just somebody who cares so much about their team that they put in the effort. So that's something I try to embody, is like choosing the seemingly low leverage tasks that are like worth my time.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Like what you're saying there is, in a sense, like the low leverage stuff is the stuff that often has the most impact, because your reports wouldn't expect you to spend time on this thing. And there's like the low leverage ends up being high leverage.
Yeah. And I think it's what makes like your style of leadership stand out or feel special to a certain person.
Amazing. Another, I don't know, ritual and kind of way of running teams that I heard about you is you encourage team members roasting each other, which on the surface doesn't sound like a wonderful environment. But on the other hand, I hear constantly that the teams that you've built are just the happiest, the highest performing teams. Talk about, I guess, this idea of roasting and encouraging that, and just what you've learned about building awesome teams.
Yeah, I think it's not that I'm like, yo, you should roast each other. Like I'm not like forcing it in that way or anything. But when I think about the sort of psychological safety and teams and like people that just get along with each other, like when you think about your friends, you're always sort of willing to like push the boundaries a little bit and like roast them. Like you're roasting your friends a lot, but you actually might not be roasting your coworkers a lot, because it's all just about like comfort and safety, right? So it's not that I'm like, oh, I want my teams to roast each other, but I think it can be a really good sign when the people on your team kind of feel comfortable just like kind of poking fun at each other a little bit. And I think that also can be a good sign when folks also feel the same way about like you as a leader, where it's like there's just an element of like they don't fear you as much, but they feel like there's a sense of safety where if they say something, they're not going to get fired. So an example of this is like with my last team, I feel like they would make fun of things that I would say at crits sometimes, like certain phrases I would say.
What's an example of that?
I don't know, like I would always be like, okay, like what are next steps? And like, how do we follow up on this? And then they'd be like, okay, like what are next steps? And they would sort of channel me in that way. Yeah, I just think it shows a level of like, okay, these people are like not necessarily afraid of me. They know that they trust me. They could trust me. And it's and then they sort of like know enough about each other and me, like personally in our personal lives, to be able to like know sort of where those boundaries are. But at the same time, I think the thing that you sort of err into in that territory is like, are you as a manager, are you friends with your reports? Which is, I think, a thing people tell you like not to do. And so the way I think about balancing this out is like this creates like the you have to create this sort of like baseline of psychological safety, and people feel comfortable both with each other and with you. But you also have to make sure that they know that you have really high standards. And I think these two things can feel like they're at tension, but I think they work really well together, because it's like once you have that psychological safety, you have people trusting each other, and you applying the high standards actually, I think, becomes potentially easier because you can do it without fear, I think. And I sort of think about this from the approach of like kind of like being a tough parent a little bit, you know? It's like, oh yeah, like my team, I work with them in a way where they know I'm always going to be there. And I'm not just going to fire them on a whim or something. But at the same time, they also know that I want the best for them, you know, and that I have high standards, and that, you know, I'm working with them to make the best work possible. And so, yeah, that's the balance I think you just strike, is like, can you create this environment of one where your team feels comfortable like roasting you, but at the same time, like they know they have to be doing great work, and they will do great work with you.
That is awesome advice. It's interesting how often this just like management style comes back, or management, good management, it comes back, reminds me of, what was it, radical candor. Just this combination of caring deeply and challenging directly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I hear here, is just make sure people know that you care deeply about them, but also be very direct and have high standards.
Yeah, exactly.
So interesting. Okay. Maybe a final question. I'm always looking for interesting frameworks and methods and processes that people have found useful in their work. And I hear you're a big fan of something called the legibility framework. Talk about this, talk about how you use it, why it's so valuable.
Yeah, this framework, I think I saw it on Twitter of maybe last year or something. And it was Evan Tana, who's a partner at SPC. He's a VC. So it basically is this like 2x2. I don't think it like got so much attention, but once I started seeing it, I like actually couldn't stop thinking about it. So on the 2x2, he basically has like founders. Like founders can be either illegible or legible, and then ideas can either be illegible or legible. And basically, he was saying that like, okay, if both the founder and the idea is like super legible, the idea is probably not that novel, and somebody's already like, they're already going to implement it or do it, and you're actually not finding something new. But then where it gets really interesting is where like the idea itself is illegible. And by illegible, he means like, oh, it's sort of like really, on the frontier, people might not get it yet, or like the way it's being told, it just doesn't, it's not like being told in the way that makes this most sense to people. And I think this is obviously a good way for a VC to operate, because you're trying to look for the opportunities that people don't see and put them out there in the world. But I also think that like part of the role of the designer, at least at a frontier lab at Anthropic, is kind of spotting the ideas that are illegible and trying to understand what's there and how to take that and like transform it, whether it's through storytelling or whether it's through like the actual UX and the form factor. And put it out there. And I think there's like when I mentioned, going through Slack and like looking at all the stuff that people are making, like that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to see like, oh yeah, what are the ideas that are really that like there's like some energy there around, but like might not make sense yet that are worth me like thinking about more in my work. There's one good example actually that like ties to co-work, where there was this internal prototype that we called like Cloud Studio that I think somebody built like partway through last year. And it essentially was this like really kind of like dense, powerful interface that was built on top of some agentic harness. It might have been Claude Code at that point in time too. And it had all these like displays where it's showing you like all this knowledge and all these skills and things Claude was doing and like previewing its outputs. And I think to a designer, I looked at it and I was like, this is like, I don't know what's going on. I don't really get it. But then I sort of saw the folks in research, the folks building it, and just folks internally. There's just a lot of energy around it, and I was like, cool. Like I think there's like something here, but I just don't understand it yet. And I think that really was an example of an illegible idea, and ultimately what came from it was like the skills framework, and like the sort of like markdown files that instruct Claude on how to do something. So that came out of that specific prototype. That was not something I was directly involved in, and that was more of like, the folks working on this prototype extracted that out of it. But when it did come to work on Claude Cowork, and I was thinking about like, oh yeah, what is the form factor for this thing? Seeing that prototype and seeing the kinds of information that people found really helpful, like seeing Claude's plan and to-dos, seeing Claude's like context and the files that it was going through. Like those kinds of things are things that I ended up pulling out of that prototype into Claude Cowork. So yeah, I think about like how can designers almost be more like VCs in this way internally when we're looking at prototypes.
This is super interesting. I did a research project recently where with this guy, Terrence Rohan, a VC actually, we looked at what are patterns across people that have joined companies very early that ended up being massive successes like Palantir and Stripe and Linear and Notion, all these companies, like people that have joined many of these companies early, what were they looking for? And one of the factors was the idea is so crazy that everyone's laughing at this. This is impossible. You're never going to do this. This is the craziest thing. Why would you even think like Palantir? Like OpenAI actually was one of them, just like some research lab doing some stuff. So it's interesting that, and it's not like every time this will work, and it's not like every crazy idea that makes no sense will be good. But I think what you're saying is pay attention to stuff that's like interesting to you and isn't totally clear. Maybe you can be the person that helps pull it together.
Yeah, that, but also like if there is some energy around it, but I don't quite always understand what the energy is, it's to like dive deeper and try to understand what that is. Yeah, yeah. Because I think people who often gravitate towards these early ideas, they can't always articulate why. And it's sort of up to you to like dive deeper and understand that.
So there's 3 patterns we found. One of the other ones was there's just pay attention to people getting very excited about this thing, even if you don't get it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, sounds crazy. That's so interesting. Okay. Yeah. And then what was the other one? Oh, the founders are just like top 1% was the other piece there, which everyone at Anthropic already is. So you got that one. Oh man, Jenny, what a crazy time we're living through. What a world.
Crazy time.
So much change. Okay. Before we get to our very exciting lightning round, is there anything else that I should have asked you that you want to leave listeners with, that you want to double down on?
I think I just want to call out the Anthropic design team and shout them out just because it's a team of folks that are just really humble, and they're not always the loudest on social, but they're doing a lot of really great work. And especially through this time where our jobs are changing so much, the team is so resilient, and they sort of span this whole spectrum of people who are really technical and prototypey to all the way to folks that are really high craft and delivering stuff that's going out the door and is fabulous. And we are hiring throughout the year, so I just wanted to call that out. If I didn't scare you with the way that we work internally at Anthropic, if it sounds more exciting than terrifying, would love to connect.
What sounds exciting is getting access to these Slacks where all the features being built.
Yeah, that's the core benefit.
Let's talk to super intelligence right now and tell me where I should invest. I'm just joking. And then in terms of hiring, is there anything specific that people should think about if they want to apply?
think a little bit about the archetypes that I mentioned, especially the strong generalist and the deep specialist. Those folks we're really excited about. But
The
generally,
block,
folks who are
the block
the
and the deep
block thing,
T.
the block and the deep T. What could we be talking about? Yeah, folks who feel like those archetypes resonate with them, but also folks that are just really excited about the technology, have been building a lot, and sort of want to be on the frontier.
Amazing. Well, with that, we've reached our very exciting lightning round. I've got 5 questions for you. Jenny, are
All
you ready?
right, I'm ready.
Here we go. What are 2 or 3 books that you find yourself recommending most to other people?
The first one is The Power Broker by Robert Caro, which is an which is an incredibly aggressive recommendation, given that it's like 1,100 pages. But I think in this era when our attention spans are so short, I think this is actually worth reading end to end. Because I think there are very few like collections or memoirs where it spans through someone's entire life and you sort of see how somebody changes throughout those decades. And it's also somebody who's really controversial too. And it's nice to sort of like read a really nuanced view of somebody, Robert Moses. And I think we just lose out on some of this like long arc thinking because we're thinking so much about right now. So it's just an important reminder that careers are long and is also really good for kind of understanding how somebody just gets things done really well. So Power Broker. The second one that I recommend to a lot of people is a book called Insomniac City, which is written by Bill Hayes, who was the partner of the scientist Oliver Sacks around the time that Oliver Sacks died. And it's just this like really beautiful kind of like ethereal memoir of Oliver Sacks' last days and their sort of love story. I think this has like very little to do with the stuff on your podcast, Lenny, but it's just a book that I really love, and just like makes you think about mortality, but also like love and life and stuff like that. So that's one of my favorite books.
My goal here isn't, we're trying to create Renaissance humans. So all of this other stuff is excellent.
Cool.
Interestingly, I saw Julie Zhu, famed design leader, was reading The Power Broker recently. I don't know what's going on over here. Spreading in design land. Okay. Do you have a favorite recent movie or TV show that you really enjoyed?
I watched A Sentimental Value recently. I watched it on a plane, which is, how directors want you to watch their films. But it's a Norwegian film by the same director who did The Worst Person in the World. I think just the pacing, the writing, the relationship between the characters is just really subtle and beautiful. It's basically about this family, sort of a family drama, but also about this house that they lived in their entire lives. It's beautiful because like the house is sort of a character. So I don't know what else to say about that, but that was a really good movie. And then I would also recommend, obviously, The Pit season 2. We're on that. We're on that. I think everybody just likes to watch people who are really competent at their jobs do something. So yeah.
Imagine being an actor on that show, just like how much you have to learn and memorize all these terms.
Yeah. It just also seems really fast paced too. Like they do so much stuff in like one shot, and there's just so much like movement and stuff like that. It seems really, really hard to be an actor on.
And I only recently realized Noah Wiley was in ER as like a younger person, and now he's like the head of this.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Favorite product you recently discovered that you really love, cannot be co-work?
Not one that I've actually discovered recently. But Retro, I've been using it for basically 2 years now since it came out. And I think I discovered new benefits of it recently. So for folks who don't know about Retro, it's sort of like this small community photo sharing app in which you can only share photos from each week, from a given week, as opposed to like all time. And it basically has like none of the social media stuff. Like you can't really see like counts. There's no ads, etc. But one really nice thing is now that I've been using it for 2 years, I can now look back at each year and see like, oh yeah, this week, 2 years ago, I was doing this. And it's become this really special way to like live through each week of my life, basically.
Wow. And it's also a beautifully crafted app if you're looking for building your own taste in design.
Yeah. Designers love Retro.
I could see that. Okay. Do you have a favorite life motto that you often come back to in work or in life?
Yeah. Not sure if it's my favorite life motto, but one thing I do catch myself saying a lot is just, it is what it is.
My dad says that all the time. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds super defeatist, but I promise it's not. I think just given how much stuff is going on in the world right now, and especially with the industry and whatnot, you can't control everything. And so sometimes it is what it is, just like brings the levity you need to move forward.
I did a 10-day meditation retreat a while ago, and I came back from it, and it's like, Dad, you've been right all along. This is the answer to it all. It is what it is. You don't cling, don't try to change. Just, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
There's so much depth to that. I was like, okay, smarter than I even thought. Okay, final question. Coming back to co-work, is there, I don't know, mind-blowing use case, something just like, wow, that's so cool that co-work can do that. Either something you use it for, or you've heard somebody using it for.
One thing I really like is just like introspection. And so I have this folder basically of like local notes that I have that I use like IA Writer for. And I basically just like write whatever, and over the years have collected it with a bunch of different notes. And they span like all different things, like one-on-one notes, like random thoughts, like kind of like tiny memos, interview notes, etc. And my favorite, like it's cool to me, is just like using co-work to like analyze that and have insights out of it and actually create things out of it. So like anytime I can like learn something new about myself, like I love that. But I think a very practical thing I did with it the other day was like along the lines of hiring. I was like, oh yeah, I want to sort of articulate like what it is that I look for, what I look for in design craft, because I think actually a lot of people struggle to articulate that. And I just had it read through all of my notes, both like interview notes and other things that I cared about and memos and stuff like that I've written in the past, and then it made me this rubric for evaluating that. So that kind of introspection where it's like, oh, I wouldn't have realized even these things about myself that I'd been putting out there implicitly. That's been really cool for me.
That is so cool. So just to make this very clear for people, you have a folder with all these things you've written, one-on-ones, meetings, like you could do, I don't know if y'all are allowed to use granola, something like that, like meeting transcripts, and ask it. And it's like, I was going to ask what prompt you use, but it's just like, read all these things I've written and help me probably just like understand how I feel about what is design craft.
Yeah, basically, I think it was like, hey, I have a bunch of interview notes and a bunch of notes related to design craft in this folder. Read it and then help me craft a memo / rubric for how I assess craft in interviews.
So cool.
Yeah.
Jenny, this was awesome. What a time to be alive.
What a time.
2 final questions. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out, and how can listeners be useful to you?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter /X is what we're calling it these days. It's at Jenny_when. That's probably the best place. Not really on LinkedIn as much. So that's the best place. And how can folks be helpful to me? Send us your product feedback. Like we're working on co-work, or anything cloud related, really. Just send us your feedback. We'd love to make it better for you.
Jenny, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. It was great chatting, Lenny.
It was wonderful. Jenny, thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.
I really believe in frameworks for things that helps drive extreme clarity. I work on a lot of different projects. A lot of times I'm ramping up mid-project. I'm like, where can I learn what I need to learn about this project? I ask 5 different people, get 5 different answers. That is unacceptable. Of course, I'm sure there's hundreds of docs associated with the project, but there needs to be one canonical doc. Everyone should know exactly where the canonical doc is. That's the one place I can go to get all the information I need about a project, and it will link to all the other docs. Things on the canonical doc are...
Today, my guest is Naomi Gleit. Naomi is head of product at Meta. Other than Mark Zuckerberg, she's the longest serving executive at Meta. She joined what was then called Facebook as employee number 29 and has been at Meta for almost 20 years. She's seen the company scale from 30 employees to the $1.5 trillion business that it is today. Naomi does very few podcasts and interviews, and so I was really excited to chat with her and have her on this podcast. In our conversation, we dig into the many lessons that she learned from Facebook's early and legendary growth team, her superpower of taking really complex and gnarly problems and projects, simplifying them and delivering results. We also get into leadership lessons she's learned from Zuck, including his recent transformation into possibly the coolest CEO in tech. Also, why PMs are the conductor of product teams, some very tactical tips for running meetings, writing docs, working out, getting better sleep, and even how to get more protein in your diet. This was such a fun conversation and such a wide-ranging conversation, and whether you are in product or growth or any other tech function, you will get something useful out of this conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes and helps the podcast tremendously. With that, I bring you Naomi Gleit. Naomi, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. As I told you earlier, I refer your podcast all the time, and so I can't believe I have the opportunity to actually talk on it.
Wow, I'm so flattered. I never get tired of hearing that. Appreciate you sharing that. I want to share a couple tidbits about you because it's pretty crazy when you see this list. Okay, so you're Meta's longest serving executive other than Mark Zuckerberg. You're employee number 29 at Facebook. You've been there for over 19 years. Sorry, at Meta, formerly Facebook.
I do that all the time. That's what happens when you've been at Meta for 19 years, is you can't get the name right.
Okay, good. I won't feel bad about that then. And then the last thing is just you've been at the center of some of the most foundational products that Meta and Facebook have worked on, including working on the early growth team and thinking about the early growth strategy. Basically, you've been there from employee number 32 today, a $1.5 trillion company, one of the largest companies in the world today. Very few people have ever seen this sort of growth and scale from the inside. First of all, I guess let me just ask this. Do you ever reflect on this and just realize like, holy shit, what a journey I've been on? How wild.
It's a great question. I would love to say that I reflect on it. The truth is, I think I barely have time to reflect right now. I'm thinking about all the things that I need to do on my to-do list. So I'm pretty in it still. Even after 19 years, I am really focused on the work that I need to do. I do honestly have moments where I get to reflect, for example, like on this podcast. Sometimes people do ask me, and I think especially as I approach the 20-year milestone, my 20-year faceversary, I'm sure that will give ample opportunity for me to look back.
Such a classic product manager answer. Like, I have too much to do.
Too busy.
Time to think about this. Yeah. I got to hit some goals here.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Pendo, the This episode is brought to you by Vanta. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things get complicated fast. Now you can assess risk, secure the trust of your customers, and automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more with a single platform, Vanta. Vanta's market-leading trust management platform helps you continuously monitor compliance, alongside reporting and tracking risk. Plus, you can save hours by completing security questionnaires with Vanta AI. Join thousands of global companies that use Vanta to automate evidence collection, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/Lenny. That's vanta.com/Lenny. Let me start. I want to start about just how you actually landed at Meta as employee number 29, which is a life-changing decision and a life-changing role. And I want to learn if there's something folks can see about what you did that might be helpful to them when they're trying to find a place to work. And your story, I was reading about the story, and it's super interesting. You basically wrote your senior thesis at Stanford about why Facebook was going to win and why it was going to beat its competitors. And the competitor cited, I've never even heard of. So it's interesting that was the competitor at the time. Could you share the story of how you landed as employee number 29 at Facebook, now Meta?
Facebook, as a process, as part of being an academic, researching Facebook, also being a Stanford student using Facebook, I was like, I really want to work here. Facebook had just moved to Palo Alto. Mark had driven across country, I guess, and arrived in Palo Alto, opened up an office at 443 Emerson Avenue, or Emerson Street. It was right above the Jing Jing's Chinese restaurant in downtown Palo Alto. And I just went to the office, sort of cold called, the equivalent of just walking into the office and seeing if there were any available jobs. There were not. I think I did that maybe 5 to 10 more times. Eventually, there was an opening to interview for Sean Parker's personal assistant. He was at the time, I think, the president. I did interview and I did not get the job. A few months later, I found out about a marketing role that was available. And one interesting thing I haven't really talked about was I got an offer from Facebook. I also got a competing offer from LinkedIn. And so at that time, I made the choice to go to Facebook because I was interested in sort of the social networking aspect of it. Why was I so bullish on this website? At the time, it was www.thefacebook.com. Like, why was I so excited about this thing? I think it's because I definitely saw that there was product market fit. I saw that students at Stanford were obsessed with it, but it also had a long list of colleges that were really excited and on the waiting list to be accepted onto Facebook. And so there was this like product market fit piece and also a huge demand from other audiences, other colleges. But, our younger brothers and sisters were also sort of interested about Facebook, and it seemed like it had this much broader appeal. So that's what happened. I got the marketing job. Cheryl also talks about when you are getting on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat. That was my foot in the door. And here we are 19 years later.
I was just going to say that's such a good example of what she recommends of if you can get a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask which seat. And I love the Sean Parker piece. I did not know that. That's hilarious. Yes. What a different life it would have been if you got that job and went down that track. So a couple takeaways here for people that are trying to pick where to work. What I love about your story is one is just like you just had confidence that this business would work, and you just knew that you wanted to get on this rocket ship. You saw traction. So I gave you, I guess, that added to this confidence that this is going to work out. And then you said that you walked into the office kind of cold. Not even cold emailing or calling, but cold arriving 5 to 10 times, you said?
Yeah, it was pure sort of just like refusing to quit. I think I just walked into the office. I talked to the person at the front desk. Is there anything that I can do? They weren't hiring non-technical people. I didn't have a computer science degree. I wasn't technical. I had this Bachelor of Arts degree. And that's why the personal assistant in the marketing role eventually did open. And was something that I thought I could be qualified for.
Cool. I think that's such an empowering lesson of if you look at someone like you and they're like, oh, she was so early at Facebook, how lucky. Clearly it wasn't luck. You knew you wanted to work at this company. You put a lot of effort into making it happen no matter the job. I think that's a really good takeaway and lesson. So if there's a company today that you're excited about, that you're just like, this is going to be a massive success, what I'm hearing is just do everything you can to try to land a job there. And eventually you'll be in a role you actually want. It doesn't have to start there.
When I got to Facebook, I knew I wanted to build. As someone who wasn't really technical, I wasn't going to be an engineer or a coder. I wanted to work with the engineers and the coders to build products. I thought product management was the right function for me. And so my dream was always to be a PM. And it wasn't luck as to how I ended up becoming a PM. I sort of took the same approach, showing up at the office, asking if there were any roles. By then, we had moved to 156 University, and all of the PMs and engineers worked on the second floor, and I was working in marketing, like I mentioned, and I worked on the third floor, and all the business functions worked on the third floor. And my goal was to be a PM. I ended up going, sort of the analogy, I went to the second floor most days after work, asked if there were any projects that I could help out with. It was very early days. There was always more to do than people to do it. And so eventually I picked up a few projects, helping with program management, giving my product feedback. And by the time that I actually applied formally to be a product manager, I had been doing the job voluntarily, almost informally, for a few months. And I remember this because I had a seat on the third floor. I picked up all the stuff on my desk, put it in a box, walked down to the second floor once I got the job to become a PM. And when I got to the second floor, I distinctly remember everyone on the second floor standing and clapping. And so it was a big standing ovation. I'll never forget Boz was there, by the way. I know Boz has been on your podcast, but even Boz was there sort of standing and clapping. And so I guess, to the lesson that you were trying to extract from my story, I do think I sort of tried to create the luck by not giving up and just repeatedly cold calling or cold showing up or cold volunteering until I sort of, was able to make it happen.
Amazing. Again, very empowering. It's not just like, oh, there's these people that just get lucky and they find this PM job. It's like, you landed at the company, I want to be a product manager, which is interesting. Most people don't grow up and I want to be a product manager. That's like a rare thing people even want, especially that early on. So it's interesting that you already knew that. But you basically did the job. You did the job of PM before you had the job. And by the time you actually asked for it, you've been doing it for a long time and you could show, hey, look, I'm actually good at this. I can do this job. Awesome. Yeah. By the way, I love the Boz connection. I'm finding that Boz is connected to the most guest of this podcast in so many different ways.
Really?
I'm curious. Yeah. Like Ami and and a few other people. It's just interesting. There's like a Boz spiderweb of connections throughout this podcast so far. Okay. So I'm going to fast forward to today. So your role today is head of product at Meta.
Yes.
What does that mean? What do you do at Meta today? How would you describe your role?
So, there are a few thousand PMs at Meta. They do not all report to me. I would say a few hundred of them report to me on the teams that I directly manage, but I feel responsible for the entire PM community at Meta. There are things that we do centrally, things like PM performance, PM culture, PM onboarding and training. And that's the kind of thing that I look out for. Obviously I wanted to be a PM. Head of product is my dream job. I am, deeply supportive of the PM function. And so I really care. And I think PMs are a huge point of leverage in a company for how we can actually, get stuff done and help accomplish the company's goals. And so I sort of focus on PM as like a really important exponential lever for doing that.
I love that. Okay. I'm going to come back to what you've learned about what makes super successful PMs and what makes you really successful. I want to take a tangent to Zuck.
Yes.
Okay. So you've known Zuck for over 20 years at this point. And I just have to ask a few Zuck questions because people are always curious to learn from what has worked so well for him. The first question is just, there's been a pretty profound transformation in Mark over the past few years, both in terms of how he leads and also just in his coolness and vibe factor. What are your thoughts on just this transformation and how he's been able to pull it off?
So I've always said that there is the biggest gap of anybody I know between what people think of Mark and who Mark really is. And so I think this is the Mark that I've known for the past 20 years, and the world is finally getting to see what I've been lucky enough to see. And that gap that we've talked about is really starting to close. How did we get here? I always say Mark is a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. He is the fastest person at upskilling of anyone I've ever met. He used to do these annual challenges. One year I did them with him. It was learning Chinese. And within a year, he was able to basically achieve an 8th grade fluency in Chinese. And that's just one example. Obviously, he's gotten incredibly great at guitar, MMA, a lot of his passions, but he's also gotten a lot better at some of the professional skills. And I think negotiation, public speaking is one of those. I think before, in the early days, it just wasn't something that he was very comfortable with. He's talked himself about coming across as a little scripted. I think he was not confident and pretty careful about how he showed up. And he's upskilled here. He's just gotten a lot more comfortable. And so people are able to see who he really is.
He was also like, I don't know, 20 something when he started Facebook, and now he's running a 80,000 person org. You know, I could see the evolution happen.
Yes. I think he might have been like 19 or 20 when I met him.
God, that's insane. So yeah, I could see why someone would change. I was at the Acquired podcast Chase event with him being interviewed, and he's just like such a cool dude now. He just has these like big shirts with his own like letters on it, his own like phrases, his chain. What a cool dude.
His long hair.
His long hair.
His watch. Yeah. I was at that event too. I thought it was great. I think, yeah, that's the no gap between who Mark is and what the world sees.
I love that. Is there something about Zuck that you know that most people don't know? Something that would surprise us?
The one thing I would say about Mark is I think people know he's married. He has 3 daughters. He's a really great dad. He's a really great husband. I would say he's also a really good friend. Maybe that's something that I can sort of speak to from experience. He's just an incredibly thoughtful friend. There was a period in my life, I think it was 2014, 10 years ago, when I was going through just sort of like a really hard time. I had come out of a breakup, but Mark saw that I was having a hard time. He asked me if I wanted to volunteer to teach a class in East Palo Alto after their school day. And in retrospect, it's pretty funny, but Mark and I taught a class about how to build a business. So you had the CEO of Meta teaching this class to a bunch of middle school students. And we got really close to them through that process. We made some really important mentorship connections for years. We met with them. I think, we still continue to, even though they've now at this point graduated from college and are, have real jobs. But one of the lessons that we taught during that class that I remember Mark distinctly like writing on the whiteboard, or not the whiteboard, it was a chalk on a chalkboard were the 4 life lessons. That was 1, and I kept these for myself as well. Love yourself. 2, only then can you truly serve others. 3, focus on what you can control. And 4, for those things, never give up. And that was sort of his life lessons, 4 steps to how to approach life. And we actually made stickers for these 4 steps that the students could actually put on their like composition notebooks as a reminder. And I think obviously that has really helped me over time. But I think that in that you can see some of what I think we all see in Mark. For example, for those things, never give up. He has that aspect of him, and it makes sense. For me, number 3 is really the hardest, which is focus on what you can control. Because I think I probably think I can control more things than I actually can.
So do we all. I love that he was sharing that in like a class on how to start a business. This like life advice that he just developed.
Totally.
Oh man, that's amazing. I want to chat a bit about, so at this point, Meta is 86,000 employees, something like that. That's what I found online. He has to run this massive org as this CEO, one person. I know that one way that he does this is he has something called a small group. Is that the term?
Yes, small group.
Okay, cool. So he's got this small group that he calls it, and it's essentially is like core execs. And this group meets regularly, and that's kind of how he's able to manage the entire org through this small group. For people that are struggling to run an increasingly larger org, are there any tidbits from how Mark and this small group operate that might be helpful to folks?
Sure. So I think the first thing is Small group is sort of the leadership team. It's the leaders working on the most important projects at the company, sort of independent of reporting structure and stuff. It's like, who are the leaders on the big most important projects or functions? They will be represented in small group. What makes this group unique? A lot of them are people like me, sort of people that have been there for a very long time. So I think sort of the tenure of small group is really rare. Why I think that's important is you have a lot of people that are motivated by mission rather than sort of climbing the corporate ladder at this point. And so there are a lot of what I call disagreeable givers. So just to back up, I don't know if you've heard this framework, but I think I learned this from Adam Grant during like a executive learning and development session. And he was saying that there are, if you think of a 2x2, there's people who are agreeable and disagreeable. And then there's people who are givers and takers. And the most dangerous kind of person to have in an organization is an agreeable taker. And what that means is an agreeable person, super nice, everyone likes them, really easy to get along with, but they're a taker. And maybe their motivation is more self-interested rather than what's best for the company, which is how I would define a giver. And the most precious person in an organization is the disagreeable giver. Those are the people who are really motivated to do what's best for the company, but they can be a little bit disagreeable in the sense that they may not say what you want to hear. They may push back on things. They may fight for things. And so I think small group is characterized by a lot of disagreeable givers. And I think that's really important for an organization. One thing I think Mark has done really well in general is just have a culture, including on his leadership team, of people who give him feedback. I think a lot of times as you get more successful or as you have more fame or if you have more wealth, you lose having an accurate feedback loop. And people may not want to be, 100% honest with you for various reasons. And Mark has tried to ensure that he himself has an accurate feedback loop, or we as a company have more of an accurate feedback loop by surrounding himself and our leadership team and creating a culture of giving direct and honest feedback. So that's, some of the unique properties of small group. From a process perspective, we have one weekly sort of strategic meeting. It's more open-ended. There is time for discussion. It's longer and it's sort of more unstructured. We also have one weekly operational meeting, which is highly structured, where we go through all of the priority projects. The person who owns each of the projects will actually speak to the weekly updates for that project. And it's very operational and tactical.
Awesome. I just love this name, small group. It's like it's just like a cozy name. It's not like executive staff or staff
Totally.
or all these terms people always use. No, it's just our small group.
Totally.
I love that. And then this framework you described, it sounds a lot like radical candor, of challenging directly but caring deeply.
Yes.
Where they're being disagreeable but being constructive and additive. Is that the term? What was it? Disagreeable but
a giver.
Giver, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
If there's nothing here, totally cool. But is there something that you changed Mark's mind about? You talked about he's good at seeing new data and being like, oh, okay, I see. Or is there anything that you were successful there that is an interesting story?
One of the things that we did in the early days on the growth team, because I'm not sure that necessarily when we talk about this sort of legacy or the history or the lore around the growth team, and this may not be a direct answer to the question, but it didn't really necessarily come from Mark. Mark wasn't like, you guys should create a growth team. Here's how you should operate. And so I think in some ways we established and grew a growth team and Mark sort of got on board or saw the value in it and was a huge proponent of it, but I'm not sure it necessarily originated with him. And indeed, I think sometimes the focus on being so data-driven might have been something that, myself, Alex Schultz, Javier Olivon, these are some of the original people that were on the growth team and that are my closest coworkers now, may have really pushed on and highlighted the value of for Mark. I'm happy to talk about the growth team, which is something I
Yeah.
get asked a lot of questions about if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to. That's exactly where I was about to segue since you brought that up. So the
Awesome.
Facebook growth team, it's a legendary team. I think it was probably the first real growth team in tech. The team developed some of the most core growth levers and techniques that companies use today. And so I'm really excited to chat a bit about this and what you learned from that time. One thing I wanted to start with is there's this like legendary activation metric that you all had of the goal was I think it was 7 friends in 10 days or something like that. Is that a real thing? Is that what you guys actually did? Anything more there for folks that are like, oh, we got to come up with something like this?
Sure. So yes, 7 friends in 10 days was a thing. 10 friends in 14 days was also a thing. They're kind of the same thing. They're just different points on a retention curve. I would say the key insight here is when we started the growth team, I think we were pretty focused on acquisition. We had a notion though of growth accounting, which looks at what's our net growth every day. And that would look at the number of new users that registered minus the number of users that actually went stale. So after a 30-day period, that's how we define it. They no longer logged in. And then plus the number of users that resurrected, which is after 30 days, they came back. And what we found was the churn and resurrection lines were actually much larger than the new user line, which implied to us that retention and driving those 2 lines was actually our biggest lever to drive net growth. And so while we were focused on acquisition, a lot of our focus shifted to be around engagement and retention. How do we drive engagement and retention? We look at the variables that correlate most with that outcome. What we found was friending. And so those 2 magic moments, having 7 friends in 10 days or 10 friends in 14 days, really just map to when we feel like your likelihood of being a retained user goes up because you've seen sort of the value in Facebook. And it kind of makes sense. Like Facebook, is much more compelling if you have 14 friends. And the other thing around 10 or 14 days is we wanted it to happen quickly. We wanted to have you experience the magic moment soon after you had registered on the site to prevent you from churning and then us having to resurrect you again.
One of the most interesting kind of lessons from this activation metric that people talk about, like right now, everyone's like, yeah, of course, retention is what you need to focus on. That's what product market fit is. Like, I think right now it's like, that's what everyone knows. I love that you guys basically figured that out. It was one of the first times of like, here's how we understand if our product will last and how to grow. Retention matters most. And retention cohort curves, I think, was one of the innovations you all thought about early of just like, here's how we track retention. People joining at a certain time, how long do they stick around?
Totally. And that was Danny Ferrante who really came up with the growth accounting framework, which I guess is quite obvious, but like the plus new minus stale plus resurrected. The thing that I feel like, may be valuable for PMs and is one of my Naomi-isms is I think what the growth team really pioneered was being data-driven and product-driven, especially in an area that was historically more of a business function. So I think at that time, a lot of the growth in new users was expected to come from like marketing or comms, whereas the insight that we had is actually the product is the biggest lever to drive growth. And that means we should have a product and engineering team working on optimizing things like the registration flow, the invite flow, the user onboarding, getting you 7 friends in 10 days. One of my Naomi-isms is really understand, identify, and execute. That framework came from 2009, where the growth team at the time, it was sort of fledgling and it just started, was focused on only instrumenting data. And Alex often wears a shirt that says, why guess when you can know? We just didn't have the data that we needed to make informed decisions, to know really what were the biggest levers to drive growth. And so in 2009, in January, we basically stopped doing anything on our roadmap except data instrumentation. And that's when we, instrumented every step of the registration flow, instrumented every step of the new user onboarding experience. We knew where there was drop off. And so we understood, which allowed us to identify what were the key opportunities to drive growth. And maybe, hey, it's like, increasing friending in the new user experience, or 20% drop off on registered users at the email confirmation step. How can we address that? These are the opportunities that we identified. And then we would execute by building products. So having this data-driven, product-driven approach to what I think historically was more of a business responsibility at a company was sort of what the growth team, the special sauce of the growth team. We eventually extended that approach. I think that approach started with the growth team, but we extended to other areas. So for example, one of the products or projects that I took on after growth was social impact. And instead of what I think a normal company might do, which is start a corporate social responsibility wing, we decided, hey, no, we're going to take a data-driven, product-driven approach to driving social impact. Instead of having a foundation that's distributing money, we're going to build a product that actually raises money from our community. And, many years later, we've raised billions of dollars from the community for charity. So that's sort of the approach that I think is unique about the growth team that expanded to other areas, and that I think that the company, in many ways has taken to most of the problems that we face.
That's such a good point. And I almost took that for granted, but there was such a huge shift that y'all started from moving from marketing being the driver of growth to product and data and experiments and all that stuff. And so I think that's such a good reminder of that. Fun fact on the social good team, I'm really close friends with the designer that was on that team. His name is Mickey. He was on that team for a while and really enjoyed really enjoyed working with you.
Oh,
Fun fact.
That's so great. I remember Mickey. What is his last name?
Settler.
Okay. Yes, I definitely remember this. Yes. And social impact is just one thing that I think I'm really proud of. And again, remember, social impact used to be a business thing. You would create this corporate social responsibility part of the company that was very separate from the product and engineering team. Another thing that we did in the early days was, there was a juncture where it was like, how are we going to translate this site? And I think we could have taken more of a non-technical traditional approach and had professional translators translate the entire site into the different languages. And instead, sort of what the growth team suggested was, why don't we build a version of Facebook that allows you to make translations in line? And so the community of people using Facebook at the time who actually knew the product the best could actually insert translations. And there was a whole system that we built around how to uprank the best translations and downrank, sort of like Wikipedia. And to this day, we have over 100 languages supported. So we're always trying to find these product technology solutions to these sort of traditional problems.
I totally remember that, where it's like you ask your users to help translate the site. Genius.
Yes.
I want to come back real quick to the activation metric, because it's something that a lot of people somewhat misuse and think maybe incorrectly about. So to come up with an activation metric, as you described, you basically figure out what's the regression of, if someone does X, here's retention increases. And so let's focus on getting them there. And a lot of people struggle with coming up with that metric. Do you have any thoughts on just how important it was to have that very specific activation milestone of 7 exact friends in exactly 10 days versus the value of just having anything that is a rallying point for everyone to focus on and drive?
I think the majority of the value is in the latter, is just having extreme clarity around the goal. And that allowed everybody to work towards optimizing the same goal. You're right. We did sort of just pick a point on the curve. I think it could have been any of those. And indeed, I as part of preparing for this, I was like, was it 7 friends in 10 days? I had to go back and I asked a few people that I worked with back in the day, and they were like, well, I thought it was 10 and 14. I mean, I think it doesn't matter. It's just that we picked one of them. And what mattered there was we had the same goal. What mattered was that it was a retention goal or an activation metric. And, one of the most important things that actually came out of having that goal was building a new user experience. Believe it or not, when we first launched Facebook, or, I wasn't around then, but in the early days of when it was just a college site, we didn't need a new user onboarding. We didn't need to explain to people that they had to find their friends. They were sort of automatically connected to everyone on the college campus and sort of knew how to use this product. It felt very intuitive. Again, we were college students building a product for other college students. They were sitting next to each other in libraries or at desks and sort of through osmosis, understanding how the product worked. It was more when we, we launched the ability for teens to register, and then work networks, and then in 2006, open registration, where we started getting all kinds of people with any email address. It was before it was .edu or like a Microsoft.com email address that was required in order to sign up for Facebook. Then anyone with any email just could register, including people like my dad and my grandma, that we realized, wow, in order to get people to this magic moment, how are we going to do that? What's the most effective way? That insight resulted in building like a new user experience. I remember it was just like step one, upload your profile picture. That was really important so people could find you and know who you were. Step two, find your friends. That's where a lot of the sort of contact importing and people you may know, and here are other people at your school, and here are mutual friends. That step in the new user experience ultimately became one of the most important drivers of that activation metric that we talked about.
I love that you shared that. Such a recurring theme on this podcast, the power of onboarding, the value of investing in onboarding and the ripple effects of opportunities there. I love that you also kind of like were one of the first, like, we need like onboarding. That's a thing. Let's invent onboarding new users.
I know. I mean, I remember the day where it was like, do we need to explain to people how to use this? Is it not obvious? And it's like, my dad's like, I don't understand this whatsoever. My dad would go on to become like Facebook's biggest power user because I always like, beta tested everything with him. But yeah, that was not obvious to us at the time in 2006 that we had to explain to people how to use Facebook. And again, remember it's fun talking about this because obviously the product has evolved so much, but the principles are relatively the same. It was the Facebook.com. Eventually it became Facebook.com, but eventually, we built a mobile app. And then, it was a mobile first product, and then it was about mobile photos, and then it was about mobile videos. So over time, the technology has really changed, but the core use case that we really need to educate people on, which is like how to connect with their friends on Facebook in whatever iteration or product, is the same. And so obviously we still have an onboarding today. And it's relatively the same principles, like get a profile picture and find your friends.
Along those same lines, just maybe a last question around the growth stuff that you worked on. For folks that are thinking, driving growth, working on onboarding, maybe specifically, just are there any lessons from things that worked super well when you were looking to accelerate growth of the Facebook early on that you think people are maybe sleeping on as levers and tactics that worked back then that might still be really powerful today?
Well, definitely the understand, identify, execute. I would just ask yourselves, do you have the data that you need to know what you need to do on growth? And if not, definitely take the time to instrument that data. The thing that, I think we were relatively lucky. I talked about why I was bullish on Facebook in 2005 even, was because there was product market fit. And so for us, growth, I as much as credit as we give to the growth team, I'm actually not sure how much credit we deserve and how much incremental growth we drove above and beyond the fact that this was a product that had product market fit, and we benefited in a huge amount from having high demand for the product. So at every step, and I talked about the growth team, the projects that we were working on were really at a high level around removing barriers. There were macro barriers, like the first project I worked on was high school students on Facebook, which is an interesting story in and of itself, because at that time we almost created a separate website called Facebook High just to keep them separate from the college students. But at that time we were like, no, this is one graph. This is one community. College students have friends and people they're connected to of all different ages. Why bifurcate the graph? And obviously we've maintained that principle ever since. But it was about removing barriers. So you had to be a college student, then you had to be a high school student, then you had to be in a work network, then you had to have any email address. One of the next projects I worked on was not everyone has access to a smartphone. How can we remove the barrier of having access to a smartphone and building more of a rich Facebook experience for someone that was using a feature phone or a lower end device? Internet.org, what about removing the barrier of having access to the internet or being able to afford a data plan? And so those are the macro barriers that thematically the growth team has worked on. What I would say is maybe applicable is really the micro barriers. all of the work that we did on growth around optimizing the flows were really about removing micro barriers. One of the things that I thought was just so elegant was after we did that 2009 instrumentation of all the flows, the product flows relevant to growth, what we found is 20% of people aren't actually confirming their email. We tried sending them an SMS, so maybe they would confirm the SMS instead. What we found was a lot of people are actually still clicking on notifications that they're getting, but because it wasn't the specific confirmation email, we weren't able to confirm the account. And so what we did was allow people to get notifications even as an unconfirmed account. And then if they clicked on any of those notifications, that would count as an account confirmation as well, because they proved ownership of the email. It's just removing a micro barrier of having to like go find the confirmation email, click it before you can do anything on the site. So I do think we've been relatively lucky in having like a lot of high demand that meant that we could focus on just removing macro barriers. And then on the growth team, a lot of the iterations and optimizations were about removing just sort of friction.
I love that framework of like micro barriers and macro barriers, just thinking about ways to make this accessible to more people and also just helping them get through the flow faster. I also love your point about how a lot of growth teams get a lot of credit for growing a business when really, in many ways, it could have done really well even without that team potentially, because product market fit was so strong. I think about this with Airbnb, honestly. It was just such, like after it gets to a certain point, such good product market fit that who knows what would happen if there was no one working on growth. It probably would have been okay for a long time.
Totally. And then, maybe where we do sort of see the impact is maybe something like the translations thing that we talked about. We would... the macro barrier, removing the language barrier. And so maybe the approach we took meant that we supported 100 plus languages instead of whatever the professional translators, there's just sort of, we have the long tail of languages. So that last person who's still speaking, whatever sort of near extinct language can still use Facebook. But yeah, I think that's right. I sometimes think that maybe some of our efforts were really more on the margin of a bigger trend around product market fit.
Final thing I would just want to highlight again that you said that I think is so important and I've always thought is true, and I love that you confirmed it, is that the activation metric that you all rallied around, the biggest value of it wasn't this is exactly the right regression connection to retention. It's more that we have something we are all going to focus on, and that is where most of the impact comes from, is let's get more people to that point, whether it's perfectly right or not. It doesn't really matter.
Yes.
Love that. I think that's really freeing to a lot of people because they're like, oh, we don't know if we're going to be as perfect about this versus let's just drive some growth and get people are good enough thinking on that. Okay, great. You mentioned Naomiisms. I want to segue to that. So let me first read a quote. So I asked Adam Mosseri, who's head of Instagram, what to ask you. I know you guys work together on a bunch of stuff. Here's how he described you. Naomi is called the conductor here at Meta. She has an incredible ability to handle the most complex projects and problems and bring the right people together to simplify and solve them. She's very firm, yet kind. Her standards are extremely high, and she sets the bar. Also, many other people that I messaged said very similar things about you, about how you're incredibly good at taking very complex problems and getting shit done, getting them done, simplifying them and getting them done. So I want to spend some time understanding what you've learned about how to do this well. What are kind of like the skills you've collected that allow you to take really complex problems and get to a solution, stay kind but firm, and take on these really hard challenges. So maybe just broadly, I'm curious, what are some of these skills that you have built that allow you to do this?
Yeah, well, also that's very kind of Adam. I adore Adam. Obviously, he's one of the tenured people in small group. And I've actually gotten the opportunity to work even more closely with him than usual. We recently launched something called Teen Accounts, and Adam and I worked very closely on that. In terms of how I do the things people say that I can do, I really rely on Naomiisms. Like I said, and actually I refer your podcast out a lot because there isn't just like a PM university that I can send people to. There isn't like a formal training that people can get to become a product manager. And that's where Naomiisms came from. It was stuff that I learned on the job from other people, including from Adam, that I found myself repeating over and over again. A good PM looks for a way to make that more efficient. For me, that was writing them down, People started calling them Naomiisms. I started sharing them internally. And then I think 2 years ago, I also started sharing them externally. Adam referred to me as a conductor. That's one of the Naomiisms in my role as head of product. I want to educate the PM community about what is PM. It's the most common question I get from PMs and non-PMs. What do PMs do? What makes a great PM? And what I say is a PM is a conductor. It's as though the team that you are a PM on is an orchestra. There are many different functions in your team that includes legal, policy, comms, data, analytics, engineering, design, much like there are many different instruments in an orchestra. And as a PM, your job is to make sure everyone's playing their part correctly. Every section in the orchestra is playing their part, but at the same time, they're playing together. They're unified in the music that they're producing and that they're playing at the right tempo. And a lot of times, I think people use music analogies or vocabulary to describe the work. And that includes things like people being in harmony, like a good team, a good PM, a good orchestra is in harmony. They're in sync. They're at the right tempo. They have the right cadence. That's sort of how I imagine what a PM does at work. Important characteristics are the PM is not the star of the show. Indeed, conductors don't even say anything during the performance. And also, but I would at the same time give PMs like little metronomes and conductor wands. This was something that I used to do when we were smaller, just to sort of take the analogy way too far.
That's so funny. You actually gave them conductor wands and
oh yeah,
and
just to wave around. Yeah,
I love that. I would love a
So PM as conductor is sort of how I describe the product management function. But one of the key Naomiisms that I think is really critical to getting stuff done is what I call extreme clarity. I think our jobs are super hard. Extreme clarity means everyone's on the same page. It definitely doesn't mean that they all agree with each other, but they just have the same understanding of the facts. So we can disagree, but we all believe, in the facts, which is that, there's A, B, C, our options are X, Y, Z, and here are the trade-offs, 1, 2, 3. That kind of shared understanding is what extreme clarity is. That came from a place of just being in many meetings, on many emails, in many situations where I felt like we actually agree on something. The nature of this conflict is a result of misunderstanding. And that seems like an incredible waste of time. And so we want to have extreme clarity so we can just focus our conversations on things when we actually agree, not when we are misunderstanding each other. There are a lot of tactics that I use to drive.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you
clarity.
do that? That sounds great. How does one get to extreme clarity?
So another Naomiism is canonical everything. So that includes canonical nomenclature. I often talk about canonical nomenclature. One way to ensure extreme clarity is we have the shared vocabulary. I've been in a lot of situations where people are using the same or different words to describe the same or different things, which results in talking past each other. One of the most egregious examples of this is when I was in a conversation around how our reviewers and global operations were performing. and we were using consistency and accuracy interchangeably. Consistency refers to how often different reviewers agree on the decision. Accuracy refers to how often the decision is correct according to ground truth. Those are very different things. We don't want to optimize for consistency because you could be consistently wrong. Like we want to optimize for accuracy. And so that is what canonical nomenclature is literally writing out all the words and their definitions. So when we communicate, we're using the same vocabulary. I really believe in visuals. I think sometimes just having a conversation or a big meeting where people are talking, I'm just not very auditory. I'm a very visual person. It's hard for me to follow along just by listening. I will often have a visual in a meeting. I will leverage that visual to literally real-time edit what is being decided. So for example, if we have multiple options, I will edit the slide that's being projected to say, we decided on option 1. Here are the next steps, 1, 2, 3. A lot of times people are saying, that's not what I heard. I heard this as a next step, or I heard that as a next step. I love that because that avoids leaving the meeting and being like, I don't know what we agreed to. I heard this, you heard that. No, actually, we have an agreed upon set of like decisions and next steps that we all real time edited and looked at together.
Just to double click on that one real quick. So what you're describing for the visual is you're presenting, here's our options. Here's our 3 options on a slide.
Yes.
You all decide we're going to go with option 2. You edit the slide with like a star, like here's what we chose, and then maybe change some stuff. And this is exactly to your point of extreme clarity. People can see clearly this is what we're choosing. If they disagree and don't realize that's what's happening, it'll be really clear.
Totally.
Awesome.
And one thing people make fun of me a lot for, but I think is just a great example of extreme clarity, is I never use bulleted lists because you can never refer to a bullet. I always use numbered lists because you can always, in the visual in a meeting, as referenced in, number 2, I have feedback on that versus like the 3rd bullet, 2 up from the 2nd, whatever. That is not extreme clarity. So it's very, very small tactical things to like bigger things like canonical everything. But yeah, I can be a little bit.
I love that very tactical tip. That is awesome. That's exactly the stuff I look for. Is there any other very nuanced tip along those lines that is helpful in extreme clarity or canonical everything?
Canonical everything, and stop me if I'm getting too wonky. I can really get into this.
We got a ways to go.
When I had a Faceversary along the years, people have given me posters, and the posters say these Naomiisms. So extreme clarity is one. Canonical everything is another. I think people really associate me with canonical. I always want a canonical doc. This came from a place of like me. I work on a lot of different projects. A lot of times I'm ramping up mid-project. I'm like, where can I learn what I need to learn about this project? I ask 5 different people, get 5 different answers. That is unacceptable. Everyone should know exactly where the canonical doc is. That's the one place I can go to get all the information I need about a project, and it will link to all the other docs. Of course, I'm sure there's hundreds of docs associated with the project, but there needs to be one canonical doc. And that canonical doc really has to have the basic information that you need to know. For any project, the basic information that you need to know is what are the discrete areas of work. I call those work streams. This is pretty obvious. Who are the owners on those work streams? So for every work stream, there's an owner. Again, seems pretty obvious. Sometimes it's like, I'm like, who's owning this? It's like, people don't know. That's why I think it's very important to have a single-threaded owner. We used to call this a directly responsible individual or a throat to choke. We obviously don't say that anymore. Single-threaded owner. Every work stream has a single-threaded owner. Sometimes work streams are really big. You have sub-work streams underneath them. Everything canonical needs to recurse. So you should have an owner or an STO for the sub-work stream. The other things on the canonical doc are, what is the process by which the people on this team work together? I hate pairwise conversations. I feel like they're a waste of time. I feel like you could have 4 conversations with 4 different people, or 1 conversation with all 4 people. Everyone has the same context. Ideally, there's a visual in that meeting and you real-time edited it. There is extreme clarity. The canonical doc will have, what is the canonical meetings that people have? What is the canonical email list that you're going to use? What is the canonical workplace chat? Let's not reinvent the same audience 10 different times with like different permutations of the people on the working team. Let's just have one canonical chat. And then often the canonical doc will have the canonical nomenclature. I really believe in frameworks for things that helps drive extreme clarity. A framework is best understood when there's a visual representation of the framework in my mind. And so we'll have canonical visuals, and that's sort of what I mean by canonical everything. So anytime I start on a new project, everyone knows to send me the canonical doc.
I love this. If you come into a project that you're given that's really gnarly and complex, what do you find are the first couple things you do that make a big dent on helping everyone align and understand what happens, what they should be doing and what they should be prioritizing?
A lot of times I'm simplifying. A lot of times there isn't a canonical doc. And so I'll go through the process of creating that. But I think that really falls under the simplification thing. I often go into a project, everyone's operating at a PhD level. I'm coming in at a kindergarten level. And so I need to understand, it's almost like all of this complexity, we're at a PhD level. I need to create the curriculum, go back to basic building blocks for the kindergarten level. How do I explain and understand this project at a kindergarten level? It doesn't mean I want to oversimplify. That's not what a simplifier does. They're not oversimplifying, but what they are doing is identifying the most basic building blocks of a complex problem and then unfolding or revealing or building on top of them additional complexity and details as you go along. And so sometimes I talk about a school pyramid, but like I need to establish the kindergarten curriculum and then the elementary school curriculum and then the high school curriculum and then the college curriculum. And then we can operate at the PhD level. But oftentimes people at different, on the project are at really different levels of understanding or complexity. And until we have what we call the school pyramid, the curriculums for every level of the project, it's really hard to make progress. A lot of times that process of simplification will often identify what are the most important things to deal with on the project.
And so what I'm hearing is when you come into a project and the way you simplify is you start putting together a doc that describes these things you're talking about. Here's the work streams, here's the owners, here's the process, here's our canonical meeting style. And that reveals here's what matters most and where there's confusion. Yes.
Yeah, that is. And a lot of times what needs to happen in the project is sometimes there's a strategy or an execution issue, and sometimes there's a people or a process issue. I would say 80% of the time, I think it's a people or process issue, and that refers to not having the right people on the project or not having the right people, but not having the right process by which they work together. A strategy or execution issue, when we get to that, I first try to tackle those, or in general, I think it's really important to have perfect execution. I want to make sure a project is perfectly executing, because only then can we really reevaluate whether or not this strategy is right or wrong. We're sort of in the worst of all worlds where we are imperfectly executing, and therefore at the end of the day, the project might fail, but we don't know why. Is it because the strategy was right or wrong, or is it because the execution was poor? The ideal case is the strategy was right and you perfectly executed on it. The next best case scenario is the strategy was wrong, but you perfectly executed on it, because then you learned the strategy was wrong. Revamp the strategy and try again.
You're really tickling the PM part of my brain. I feel like most PMs listening are like, yes, clean documents, really simple processes, the one person in charge, links to everything. It just feels good.
Totally. And sometimes I feel the need to defend that the process is not for process sake. It's ultimately to help us all move faster and work better. So hopefully that comes through. But I deeply believe that it is through this approach that we can move faster. And I have to, you have to prove that. Nobody wants more process and more meetings and more. But my goal is that with this, we're actually simplifying process and getting less meetings and just making things clearer and ultimately moving faster.
I'm going to read another quote from another one of your coworkers, Charles Porch. He's vice president of global partnerships at Instagram. And he basically said what we've been talking about. Some of the biggest strategic bets and biggest swings Meta has made have had Naomi at the helm. No one can herd cats, drive clarity, and get to outcomes more seamlessly than she can. She's legendary within Meta for her canonical documents.
Great.
If maybe just like following this thread a little bit further, what's the gnarliest project that you've worked on that would be a good example of you coming in and helping simplify and get it over the finish line?
Well, Charles, maybe thinking of the most recent project that we worked on. I don't know if it's necessarily the gnarliest, but it's definitely one of the most cross-functional projects that I've worked on before. Basically, every team at the company in some way works on youth. And last week, we actually launched Teen Accounts, which was a very complex project. Again, like it involved the Instagram team, the central youth team, the different teams working on various aspects of this, every function, legal, policy, comms, marketing, product. And I think we definitely leveraged a lot of these Naomiisms. And just to give you a sense of what Teen Accounts is, it was basically putting all teens into the safest settings by default on Instagram. And the reason I'm working on this, I work across multiple teams at Facebook. So obviously Adam is the head of Instagram, and I work closely with him on this, like I was referring to yesterday. But this is something like these teen accounts is something that we are thinking about how we expand to the other apps that we have, including Facebook and WhatsApp and Threads. And I tend to work on projects that are across our family of apps and future platforms. And that's sort of why I was involved in this. But basically what Teen Accounts does is put teens in these safest settings. It's super focused on trying to address parents' biggest concerns around their teens on social media. This has obviously been a really big topic. We've had a lot of these features and tools. What this launch did is simplify things, standardize things, and add a lot more functionality that gives parents controls. I think the thing you really need to know is that for under 16-year-olds, if they want to change any of these defaults, they're going to have to get their parents' permission. And so it's interesting that, we're really going to create an incentive for teens to get their parents involved and to actually set up parental supervision, especially because one of the default settings is a private account. So there's tens of millions of teens that currently have public accounts today that we are going to automatically transition to private accounts unless they get their parents' permission to stay public. And so it's a relatively big shift, a fundamental change for how Instagram works for teens. And yeah, I would say one of the more complicated projects that I've worked on.
Yeah, and it just launched, right?
Yes.
As a new father, I'm excited for you all to be working on these sorts of things. I don't need it yet, but I'm glad it's going to be there. And it's funny how Meta and Facebook is in this world where people complain about teens using social media, and then you work on making the product better for teens and kids using social media. And then it's like, Facebook's for getting teens on social media. Like there's no way to make it feel good to people. No matter what you do, people are going to complain. That's what
totally. And I think that the goal of this launch was to orient ourselves, and really there's a lot of complaints. There's a lot of, different voices. I think we just are focused on parents. We think parents know best. Every kid is different and parents know their own kid the best. So that has been our North Star in terms of the approach here. When I talk about teen accounts, as product people, I think one thing that you would appreciate is the thing that I think is really important when it comes to teens on the internet is really having an understanding of how old someone is when they're using our apps. And it's important that we know how old they are because then we can put them in an age-appropriate experience. So now we have teen accounts. We want to put all teens into teen accounts. We all know sometimes teens lie. That's sort of been the biggest feedback that we've been getting is teens are really smart. They're going to find workarounds. They're going to be creative. They're going to lie about their age. And as a product person, the way that I think this should really work is that instead of everyone entering, teens use on average 40 apps. Instead of Instagram and the other 39 apps that teens use, trying to verify the age of the person using their app, it's for two companies to do this, which is Apple and Google. They do collect the age. They should make that available to developers. And we ask for information from the device all the time with user consent. Can Instagram have access to your camera? Can Instagram have access to your location information? Apps should be able to ask, can Instagram have access to your birthday? And that would, I think, sort of elegantly, from a product perspective, from a simplification perspective, from a privacy preserving perspective, and what's easiest for parents, that would be the right product solution to solve this problem around age that we're all sort of trying to grapple with right now. And there's a lot of stuff that we're doing. Part of the reason that this project was so complicated, and I mentioned the age team, is like we're building classifiers to try to predict how old people are based on not just the age that they've stated, but based on who they're talking to, what kind of content they're looking at, what the age of the people they're connected to is. Do we think that this is actually an adult like they say, or is it really a teen? And so we're doing a lot to try to predict age or prevent people from lying about their age. But I think this would be a really big win for the industry.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Thank you, Lenny.
So to close out this portion in this chapter of our conversation on Naomiisms, I know something else that you're really good at that I've heard from a few people is running meetings. Something that a lot of people always want to get better at. Any tips? What have you learned about running great meetings?
A meeting is a high value and high cost sort of amount of time. And I want to make sure it's as productive as possible. What I will do is send an agenda 24 hours prior to the meeting. That agenda will include a pre-read. I've talked to people who, if the pre-read is not attached to the calendar invite or like associated with the meeting at least 24 hours in advance, they will cancel the meeting. That just goes to show we want everybody in the meeting to have full context, have read the pre-read. Often what will happen in the previous 24 hours is because we're all sending pre-reads on Google Slides, there will be a lot of conversation and questions that get hashed out leading up to the meeting. During the meeting, like I said, I think it's really important for a group of people to be looking at something and anchoring people on something. If somebody joins the meeting, say 5 minutes late, they should know exactly where in the agenda you are in the meeting and like what is being discussed based on like catching up from the visual that's being projected. Usually a meeting can be, and hopefully a meeting is really is a decision meeting. So if there's a decision, I need 3 options and I need a recommendation. That should hopefully help focus the meeting. And then, like I said, I will real-time edit the visual such that we document and have extreme clarity on what is the option that we agreed on and any next steps that we also agreed to. After the meeting, anyone who wasn't in the meeting, that's fine, because within 24 hours post-meeting, I will send the notes, reply all to the meeting invite and send the notes. So just like tactically, I use the calendar invite as the canonical unit by which to handle all of this communication, because a lot of times meetings are one-offs. There isn't an existing sort of email or chat thread that maps perfectly to the audience of the meeting. So for me, that is the meeting or the calendar invite. So I'll click on the calendar invite, reply all, include the pre-read, pre-meeting, and then do this like reply all again post-meeting 24 hours with the notes and the decisions and the next steps.
I love this. So many very specific
Yes.
tactics here. I love it. This is food for my brain. I love the always have 3 options and a recommendation. That's such a simple thing to recommend, but such a powerful way of operating as a PM. Just like, here's the options. Here's what I recommend. Here's why.
Oh, one thing I forgot that I learned from Guy Rosen, he is our chief security officer, is when you have 3 options and a recommendation, in terms of evaluating the options, I don't love pros and cons. It's a flat list of text. It's hard to, just get the big picture from that. Oftentimes we'll use a traffic light. That means that the 3 options are 3 rows. The columns in the table will be criteria by which to evaluate the options. Those could either be functions. So for example, if I have 3 options as the rows, column 1 could be the legal perspective. Column 2 could be the policy perspective. Column 3 could be the privacy or product perspective. Alternatively, the columns could map to different criteria, like what we're optimizing for. So it could be the user experience. It could be the engineering feasibility. It could be the, internal complexity. Whatever are the criteria should be laid out in the columns. And then obviously it should be color coded, red, yellow, green, based on how it stacks up against those criteria. And what this allows is, to get back to the point of the visual, is you can quickly look at the three options, see where's the most red, and sort of rule that out. Ideally, the recommendation has some combination of like, the more green or yellow than the other options. And then obviously within the cells, you can spell out the specific rationale for the coloring. But I think this is a really good way to run a meeting and just create extreme clarity around how you're evaluating the options in a way that like a flat list of pros and cons just doesn't.
What other podcast would have this level of detail of how to run a discussion on a decision? And this is exactly what people want to hear. So I love it. This is product market fit for listeners of this podcast. I love it. I love it. And obviously the reason this is more effective is it's not just like, here's a quick sentence on the pro and con. It's like, here's what I actually think, if this is good or bad for the things that matter to the business. So
that's exactly
that makes tons
right.
of sense.
It also gives people a framework to plug into. A lot of times the creation of a pre-read for these discussions involves many different people from many different teams and functions. If you have a traffic light, they can own filling out their cell. They can own the rationale behind the legal position on option 1, 2, and 3. And in general, I'm super into frameworks that allow people to plug into and clearly represent their point of view.
Love it. Final question, completely different topic. I saw a Wall Street Journal story about how you exercise and your exercise regimen and how important that is to your life and career. Now, most people don't have a Wall Street Journal story about their exercise regimen, especially a tech worker. And I know this is just important to your work and they wrote that this basically helps you become better at your job. Any advice there for folks that want to, lean into exercise more, for how to actually do that? Because your advice is this actually makes you better at work and life.
I believe that. People are always like, what are you training for? And I'm like, I'm training for life. Like I have 4 musties. It is eat, sleep, alone time, and exercise. Those are the things that I need in order to perform in the other areas of my life. Seems pretty obvious, but until recently, I actually did not prioritize sleep. My boyfriend is actually super into sleep. We have the 8 sleep. We have eye masks. We have blackout shades. We have like good sleep hygiene. And so I'm getting much better at that. But exercise is something that I've always been on top of. Alone time is also a mustie for me because I'm an introvert. I need that time to recharge. Otherwise, I think I get kind of weird around people. In terms of how I prioritize it, it's sort of a non-negotiable or table stakes. Every morning I have to work out. I am also lucky enough to work in an environment where I can wear workout clothes to work, which I often do. I think working out is sure the hour of the day that I'm doing my exercise, but I also view, like I said, life is a workout. Performing at work is a workout. I need to be able to move. I need to feel comfortable. It's very physical, I think, especially if you're trying really hard to be a conductor and running around with like a metaphorical conductor wand. I need to be able to move. A while ago, and that's what the Wall Street Journal article was about, I set a goal of doing 5 pull-ups. I'd read somewhere in an article that less than 1% of women can actually do pull-ups. I think having a goal is really helpful. That's something that I worked on, and anyone can do this, truly, if you train for it. I think it's potentially more technique for me than like strength per se. And I worked up towards that goal. I think exercise, in addition to all of the physical benefits, primarily has a mental health benefit, I think, for me. And also there are just like a lot of lessons that I think I take from exercise. So for example, I think being able to do 5 pull-ups sort of taught me I can do hard things in this sort of really narrow, measurable way, which gave me confidence in other aspects of my life.
I had a friend who her goal was do 1 push-up.
1 push-up.
She's like, I want to be able to do 1 push-up. And that was really motivating to her. And then she finally got there, and then she could do more push-ups.
That's awesome.
And, yeah. Similar. I have so many notes here as you were talking. The other is sleep advice. So eye mask. I have an awesome eye mask that I'll recommend in the show notes. It's
Please.
funny.
What is it?
of all the things I've recommended in all the various places, I get the most comments about, thank you for this very specific eye mask. It changed my life. It's like Wawa. It's one Tim Ferriss is often recommended.
Okay.
WAO. I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's
great.
Wawa. Let me look it up real quick because people are going to be like, oh, I got to get it. Wawa eye mask.
The one that we have has sort of cushions around the eyes such that it's it's not flush against your eyes.
Yeah, this is the same. Okay.
Oh, great.
WAOAW sleep mask on Amazon. It's $13 and amazing. My wife and I both sleep with these eye masks, and it's ridiculous until you're like, oh, I can't sleep without one now.
Totally. Well, there's a lot of research that even like ambient lighting results in lower quality sleep. So I think that's why the blackout shades and the eye mask just help ensure it's truly dark.
Yeah, I was just watching a podcast, and the advice there is even like your smoke alarm with a little light is too much light. Like you need to cover that up to create real darkness. And why not just wear an eye mask? You don't have to worry about any of that.
Yes, totally.
Okay. And then one thing I didn't mention when you're talking about the conductor, the PM as a conductor, that's exactly the metaphor I've always used my entire career when people ask me about what is product manager. So we're like,
really?
Yeah. I have all these slides of like, here's the PM, and it's like a symphony and the conductor standing there.
Lenny,
Yes.
do you know how happy that makes me? Because I feel like sometimes people are like, that sounds crazy. But the fact that you actually came to that same conclusion makes me like why did you come to that conclusion? I'm just curious.
Because as you said, the PM's not like not making the thing. They're just helping each of the people who are the most talented at their very specific skill do the best possible work. And their back is, to the audience. They're kind of trying to stay out of the way, even though, they come in, everyone claps for them. PMs kind of get that.
Yeah.
And then in theory, they could like step in a little bit to help out when you need, they can pinch hit on like design here and there and research here and there, probably not engineering. So those are kind of the reasons. And, they're not in charge. That, the chair one violinist is the actual person that's making the music and the best at this thing.
It's so great to hear somebody else talk about this too. Thank you. And I think that is really how I view my role and what I do. And I think maybe just hearing you talk about it reminded me why I think I put so much emphasis on just elevating the people on my team and the people around me. And one of the, sort of candidly, one of the development areas for me, and it could be sort of downstream because I do have this analogy of how to be a PM, is that the growth feedback or the constructive feedback for me is really learning when to lead from the front more, maybe when to be less of a quiet conductor that's really elevating the first chair violinist, and be more front facing. I think a lot of my approach and my leadership style is really leading through the people on my team and helping grow them. And a lot of times I think that, they're dedicated, they're experts, they know, particular areas. Obviously, as a head of product, I manage a portfolio of different projects, of which each of them has the incredible leader on it. And so oftentimes I'm just really trying to lead from behind and help them be as successful as possible. But there is a time and a place when maybe that silent conductor needs to take more of a vocal and front facing role.
I know exactly what you mean. I had the same problem when I was a PM, because there's always this like fear that PM's in charge and telling everyone to do. And so I had the opposite of like, okay, and that's not me. I'm going to just let you do the things you think are best. And I'll just make sure the best ideas come to the surface. And I had to learn exactly the same thing. Sometimes people just want you to point them in the right direction and make the decision in the end. And the best PMs are people that have the best opinions about what is going to work, have intuition of what users need, have strong product sense and all that stuff. I've had this post that I'm trying to work on along these lines where there's this kind of reaction to PMs aren't the CEO of the product. They're just,
Yes.
like, no, don't call yourselves that. I think it's the opposite. I think PMs actually should think of themselves as the CEO of the product, not in terms of they are in charge and can fire people and manage people, but they're the closest heuristic for what the CEO and the founder wants. They think of what does the business need, what is going to help the user, the customers, what's going to help us grow. And I think the PM is the closest to that role. And so I think it's important to think of that role as that. even though you're not, technically in charge.
Yeah. And maybe you could call it something different, but I totally agree with that sentiment. I think we were trying to, push against the criticism that like PMs were sort of bossing everybody around and like, but I actually,
there's baggage there.
There's baggage there. I call it, there is something called the great non-technical sort of, there was a period of time at Facebook where I think the PMs really had to prove their value to the engineers and show that we were actually not slowing things down with all this extra process. You can imagine an engineer hearing me talk about like how to run a meeting and all the canonical docs and just be like, what? This sounds terrible. So yeah, we had to prove that. But I actually do think the PM is the closest to really channeling what the CEO or the founder wants. And another thing that I've worked on and that I am working on is really developing a much stronger first party perspective. Like, it's not enough for the PM to run this people and process that we talked about. Obviously, I love that stuff. I lean that way. But at the end of the day, a PM cannot like outsource their perspective or delegate their thinking through people and process. And so for me, that has been a learning curve. And I am trying to, as someone who's very like sort of consensus driven, I want to hear all the different opinions from all the different people. I can still do that. I can still, through people and process, talk to all the different folks working on a project, hear their first party perspectives, and then use all of that to synthesize my own, because it will be unique given my role on the team and just sort of what I'm trying to optimize for, and really make sure that I both develop that first party opinion and communicate it clearly. And like you said, the best PMs, I think, can do it all.
Just to follow this thread, one thread further, because this is something I think a lot of product managers work on and are told to work on. Is there anything you found to be helpful in building this skill in yourself that might be helpful to folks that are working on it?
I'm lucky enough, because I sort of have a big team. I have someone who helps me schedule my time. And I used to goal that person and goal our work together on just being as efficient as possible. But now what I am goaling that person and what we're trying to accomplish here is giving me as much time to develop a first party point of view. And so sort of what is the most effective way to do that? And for me, it is having, 2 to 3 hour blocks of time where I can actually sit, think, have space. But maybe something that's different about me than other people is it's very, very helpful for me to talk to maybe 1 or 2 people, not be in a big meeting with like 40 people, sort of trusted people. I have an incredible person on my team that I talk to that I think really helps me clarify my thinking. And so to go back to the beginning, just I'm trying to find blocks in my day that I can spend time thinking, and also within those blocks, they don't have to be alone time. They can also be scheduling sort of my chief of staff and like my head of data to bounce ideas off of as a sounding board, because that is the process that I know works best for me in terms of really developing a first party perspective.
Such a good tip. Like, it makes sense if you're just spending all your day coordinating in meetings, checking things, reviewing things. You have no time to actually think about what you think is the right move and answer and strategy and next step. And so that's a really good tip. If you're finding that you don't have time to think about what you think is the right solution and the right strategy and the right product decision, just block time to think about this stuff. I always try to, I had these deep work slots on my calendar. I've written about this a few times, where it's 3 hours and the invite, I don't know if you can do this these days, but it was just, if you book time during the slot, I will slap you. And nobody
That's
did.
amazing. And, I think for me, some people might need 3 hours on their own. I think for me, and I don't know about you, talking things through with 1 or 2 people really helps me as well. So sometimes it was almost like quite challenging for me to think of going into a room by myself for 3 hours and then I was just going to like figure it out on my own. This is like and I don't know how people think strategically the best, but it doesn't have to necessarily be alone.
That's a great tip. Just have a sparring partner, someone that
yes
is just interested in exploring ideas and not just have a clear agenda. I love that. Okay, Naomi, I love this tangent we went on as we were wrapping up.
I know, totally.
That was amazing. There's a lot of good stuff that we covered there. But I know you have to run. So before we get to our very exciting lightning round, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you wanted to cover or share?
Honestly, I think I just did it. I didn't even realize I wanted to talk about that, but it just all came out.
I love it. I love that. Those are the best nuggets. With that, we reached our very exciting lightning round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
First question. What are 2 or 3 books that you've recommended most to other people?
I really love narrative nonfiction. So I like the Erik Larson books. They're a very compelling and page-turning way to learn about history. I recently read Devil in the White City, and there was also one about Churchill's first year by Erik Larson. Another book that, just the canonical book that I often recommend is Sapiens. I think he's a great example of what we talk about when we talk about simplifiers. He took a very complex subject, which is all of human history, and tried to pull out the nuggets. I think his thesis that what differentiates humans from other forms of life is really our ability to tell and believe in myths or stories. And he cites money and religion as examples. But also there's a graphic novel version of Sapiens. And so he almost has like the PhD level. And then he literally has like the high school level, which is a graphic novel version. He also has like Unstoppable Us, which I think is a kid's version. And so clearly here is someone who is a master. There's like a James Clear thing that a friend Shirley told me about, where it's like, if you're a beginner, you have like ignorant simplicity, and intermediate has like functional complexity, and then like a master of a topic has profound simplicity. And that's what I feel like Noah Yuval Harari really has, because he can go all the way up and down the school pyramid in terms of explaining this really complex topic.
What I heard about him is that he goes on a 1-month meditation retreat every year, where it's just him, silent meditation retreat. And people ask him, how do you have time to do that when you have so much work to do? He's like, the only way I'm able to achieve these books where I synthesize all of human history into a story is because I do that, because I can clear my mind and just be.
And Lenny, to our previous conversation, that is how he himself and like is best. That's what he needs to do. I might need 2 to 3 hours a day in a sparring partner. No, Yuval Harari needs a month in silent meditation.
Great point. Everyone has their own way of unlocking their brain. On Devil in the White City, fun fact, when I read that, I was like, I need to go to Chicago and see the stuff that they wrote about in this book about the World's Fair. And so I went to Chicago. And
you did?
Because of that book, yes.
Wow. Have you read The Splendid and the Vile?
Yes, that was the about
Churchill.
The telegram, right? Yeah, right?
Oh, no, there's Churchill's first year. But,
Okay.
He has like 6 books. I haven't read all of them.
Okay. I think it was either that one or something about a telegram. I did read. It was less good, though, is what I find. I found The Devil in the White City was
the best.
Was the best. Amazing. Okay, we'll keep going. Second question. Do you have a favorite movie or TV show you recently watched that you really enjoyed?
We just watched Shogun. I thought it was really good. Have you seen it?
I have. Yes, I loved it. Very gruesome, but amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I had to cover my eyes for some of it. And then the movie that we just watched was Dune 2. Chris Cox, who's our chief product officer, actually recommended that as one of the, best films that he's seen recently. And I really trust his opinion on that. So we caught up by watching Dune 1 and then watched Dune 2, and it was really good.
I watched that in IMAX theater in San Francisco. This like insanely large screen, and highly recommend that. I don't think it's still out there. Yeah, the movie's ridiculous, amazing. I think there's another one coming someday.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Dune 3.
Dune 3. I'm just keep them coming. Next question. Do you have a favorite product you recently discovered that you really love?
So, I'm going to check out that eye mask that you recommended, the Wawo thing.
Yeah, that's it.
But I know it's super expensive, but have you tried the 8 Sleep?
I have. My wife doesn't love it. She doesn't like the noise. It's like a very slight noise when it, starts up, but she wakes her up, so we don't have it anymore.
And I noticed that too. I think maybe they just released like the latest edition. One of the features that is the killer feature for me is that it does a vibrating alarm, so that when I wake up at 6 a.m., I do not wake up everyone in the house at 6 a.m. And so it's a thermal alarm. It makes the bed on my side hotter, and it also slightly vibrates underneath my ear to wake me up.
It's under your ear? I remember vibrating my whole part of the bed. I wonder if that's a new feature.
Maybe this is like, I'm on version 3. Maybe there's a version 4. I don't know. Maybe that was version 1.
Man, that's so funny. A nice thing about my life right now is that because I have no meetings or boss, I don't need an alarm. However, it's amazing.
Awesome.
However, we have a young kid and he wakes up at 6 to 6:30. So that's my alarm usually.
Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if you have this problem, but I'm trying to get like 100 grams of protein every day. I think a lot of my friends and I are sort of, focused on protein consumption right now. And so my trainer, who helped me actually do the pull-ups and the push-ups, started a protein powder company, protein products company called ProMix that I really love. And he has like this Rice Krispie treat thing that I usually eat every morning and gives me 15 grams of protein.
I just bought that.
What?
Yes. I was reading Kevin Rose had his like health stack. And I don't know if that's the brand, but it's exactly a Rice Krispie thing with 15 grams of protein. So I'm pretty sure that's it.
I'm pretty sure that's it because the Rice Krispie part of it is very unique. So let me know what you think. I really like the chocolate chip flavor.
I eat them and I love them. So that's a really good tip.
Okay.
And I just saw a funny TikTok where it's like, I never thought when I'd grow up and be an adult, I'd be thinking so often about protein and how much protein I should be eating.
Maybe this is 40. I don't know. I'm not sure for me, but yes, I've been thinking a lot about protein. The other thing I really like is canned seafood, which has a lot of protein. So something called Fishwife has it's just sort of hipster,
I've
chicken
seen them.
of the
They're very
sea.
cute. Yes, my wife gets those.
Yes.
Another protein tip. They were a former sponsor, but no longer. But it's an amazing protein tip. Maui Nui venison beef sticks. It's 10 grams of protein and it's a delicious venison beef stick.
Thank you.
There we go.
Look at what we've become, Lenny.
I'm just protein obsessed. I'm just going to be so protein rich. Amazing. Okay. What else we got here? Okay, 2 more questions. Do you have a favorite life motto that you often come back to and find helpful in work or in life?
Last month we were watching, or I guess 2 weeks ago, we were watching the US Open, and we discovered that as people come through the hallway to come onto the court to play, the players all pass the Billie Jean King sign that says pressure is privilege. And I really loved that because I think just sort of with the teen accounts launch and just like a lot of the more public facing stuff that I've done recently, I do, like we talked about, get nervous, and I think pressure is privilege just reminds me that a lot of this stuff is a really incredible opportunity that I have, and to be grateful for it. I can still be nervous, but also recognize and be grateful for it.
I love that. Just remind yourself that you're lucky to be feeling this pressure, because that means something is important. A slightly different version of that is Zuck at the event in the Chase Center that you were also at had the shirt that said in Latin,
learning through suffering.
Learning through suffering.
Learning through suffering. I like that one too. I mean, I think he spoke a little bit about this. Being an entrepreneur is really, really hard.
Yeah. They had the Jensen line about how people asked him if he'd start NVIDIA again. And his answer was like, if I knew how insanely hard and stressful this was, I would not. Very, very honest. Okay, last question. So Charles, your former colleague, told me that you're an incredible surfer.
Oh.
And that you design your life almost around where and when you can go surf.
Yeah.
Any story or lesson or, I don't know, takeaway from surfing and the impact that's had on you? Lessons about surfing.
So I think surfing and life have a lot of parallels. It is an incredibly mental sport for me. The biggest thing that I can do to improve my surfing is to improve my confidence. And so when I'm going for a wave, a lot of times I will hesitate or pull back or, instead, the best thing that you can actually do in that situation is stand up into your fear, like is to ride the wave. That is the safest thing you can do. That is the, thing that you're actually supposed to do. But on every dimension, that's the right thing. And so it's almost, I guess the motto there is stand up into the fear when you're about to catch a wave. And actually the things that you can do when you're afraid, for example, like I said, pull back or like throw your board, are actually quite counterproductive and actually unsafe and could lead to more injury. And so it's just another reminder that you really need to commit and stand up into your fear.
I love it. Stand up into your fear, and pressure is a privilege, and learning through suffering. Naomi, this was so much fun. I'm so happy that you agreed to do this. 2 final questions. Where can folks find you online? Where do they find Naomiisms, and anything else you want to point folks to? And how can listeners be useful to you?
So believe it or not, I have Naomi.com. I know Boz has Boz.com. I bought that URL, I think maybe 20 years ago, 15 to 20 years ago, from a farmer, actually, whose name was Naomi, or whose wife's name was Naomi, rather, and his wife was not using it. And so I got it for quite a steal. And I will just say that I've had other famous Naomis, much more famous than much more well known than I, who would like to have Naomi.com make offers for this URL. But I really like having just sort of a home on the internet where I can put my Naomiisms. They're also available on Instagram, Naomi Gleit. How can listeners be useful to you? I think, Lenny, I mentioned this before we got on the call. I don't tend to do that much sort of public speaking or talking about Naomiisms. I did some of it 2 years ago when we first launched, but I, as a result of being on the podcast and stuff, would love to do more of this. And so I think any feedback on what listeners would like to see or hear from me, questions that would sort of give me a reason where I felt like it would be useful for me to do more on Naomiisms would be super helpful.
Sweet. So if you have any of those, leave them in the YouTube comments. Is usually the easiest place for folks to leave that. Naomi, thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun.
Thank you, Lenny.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.